Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals, and honestly the mud-caked bare feet of a medieval mother. You know, the type of woman you see in those old tapestries. Sunburned, hair escaping her headscarf, skirt hiked to avoid puddles, with a baby slung across one hip, and an armload of chores weighing down the other. The sky's already ink black overhead, except for the faint orange flicker leaking from cottage doorways, and the tiny firefly dots of oil lamps left burning along the lane. You trudge slowly, every step reminding you that mud is more persistent than hope, and your child, warm, fussy, impossibly small, breathes shallowly against your chest. There's a smoky tang in the air that never really leaves your clothes or hair, even after you beat your best shift with lie and prayers. You smell the livestock before you see them, and you know each animal by sound and shadow, an essential skill, considering how many are more valuable than most village children. Tonight the wind is brisk and cold, slicing through the holes in your patched cloak, reminding you that spring means rain, not warmth. Here's your no-nonsense medieval reality check. If you are a mother here, odds are you will bury more children than you raise. Maybe that's the world's cruelest math, but it's honest. And you already know honesty doesn't spare your feelings. A single fever, a hungry wolf, a moment's inattention, and a family line can vanish before the next sunrise. Sometimes, it's so bleak you have to laugh, just to keep the tears in check. You probably won't survive this life unchanged. Or if you do, you won't survive it unscarred. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Always love seeing how many of you are drifting off across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Inside your one-room home, shadows crawl up the walls like gentle ghosts. The thatch above leaks in 3 places, but you know where to put the buckets now. The fire pit glows a dull red, casting just enough warmth to keep the damp at bay. Your older children are curled on pallets of straw and rags, their breaths crackling with coughs you pretend are from the smoke. Every time your baby snuffles, you tense. Is it a normal sound, or the beginning of another fever that could sweep through your household like a rumour gone wild? The daily rhythm here is as relentless as the toll of the church bell. At dawn, you're already awake, hands numb from kneading dough or wringing out the linens. You whisper a prayer, more from habit than faith, and glance at your child, hoping that today is not the day your luck runs out. By midday, your back aches from hauling water, your arms from splitting kindling, and your nerves from listening for that telltale wheeze or sudden silence from your youngest. In the evening, you return home through those same muddy lanes, a child in your arms and a weight in your chest. You measure life in your village by seasons, not years, because time here doesn't behave itself. A winter can stretch on so long you wonder if the sun will ever warm your bones again, and a summer can turn to famine in the blink of an eye. You've learned not to plan too far ahead. One mainstream fact that hits home: in much of medieval Europe, more than a third, sometimes half, of all children die before age 5. It's not an exaggeration. You've seen it play out among your neighbours, your sisters, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, your own household. Graveyards aren't filled with stories, they're filled with futures that never happened. Grief is everywhere, but so is a kind of rough, necessary humour. You joke with the other mothers about how your laundry will never dry, how children seem to invent new ways to get sick, and how even the priest's cat has 9 lives while your own luck ran out years ago. Someone's always quick with a bit of dark humour. If only we could teach children to be as stubborn as weeds, maybe half of them would survive. You laugh, because not laughing feels like admitting defeat, and if you give in to despair, you'll drown in it. And yet, hope persists. Every night you do your best to shield your baby from the draft, the fleas and the nightmares. You tie tiny bundles of herbs over the crib, believing they might ward off bad spirits. You whisper secrets to the moon, promising to be better, braver, more vigilant if only your child is spared. Historians still argue whether such rituals brought any comfort, or if they simply piled guilt onto already burdened women. Were you to blame if you forgot the rosemary? Did your neighbour's glance curse your child? There's never enough of anything here except worry. Not enough bread to fill all the bellies, not enough dry wood to chase away the chill, not enough hands to hold on to every child who slips away. Still, you find ways to cope. You sing. Maybe you sew charms into the hems of your children's tunics, or smear a bit of honey on a newborn's lips, trusting the old stories that say sweetness at birth brings health in life. It's a quirky tidbit, one of hundreds, passed down like heirlooms and half-remembered prayers. Sometimes, you listen to the tales told by grandmothers who insist that children born on Tuesdays will always be unlucky, or that the 12th night after a birth is the most dangerous of all. You smile politely, even as you cross yourself 3 times just in case. In the absence of science, you try everything. If a cow dies mysteriously, it's assigned to check the children for fever. If a neighbour's child falls ill, you quietly wonder what curse or carelessness set it off. Still, the real dangers are far less mysterious. Rats gnaw at the stored grain and sometimes bite babies as they sleep. The well water turns foul after heavy rains, and your eldest daughter tells you in a whisper about a boy who drank from the stream and never woke up. You boil the water when you can, but firewood is precious. You've learned to pick out the cough that signals trouble, to watch for the sunken eyes and pale lips that mean your child might be slipping away. Yet, for every superstition, there's a kernel of truth. You know to keep the baby wrapped tight in cold weather, to rub a little fat on chapped cheeks, to trust your gut when a child seems off. You remember the neighbour who said, "A mother's instincts are worth more than a dozen doctors," though you've never actually seen a doctor. If someone in the village is dying, the midwife comes, and if she fails, the priest takes over. Medicine is whatever you can forage, barter or brew. Some mothers swear by chamomile and yarrow, others trust in leeches and strong wine. Historians still debate the impact of such folk wisdom. Was it enough? Did it help or just delay the inevitable? Sometimes it seems like the only constant is loss, and yet you love, fiercely and without reservation, because that's what mothers do. The baby in your arms clings to life as tenaciously as you do, and for tonight at least you are together. As you rock your child to sleep, the fire dying down to a gentle glow, you allow yourself a small secret smile. Today, your child lived. That is no small feat. You tuck the blanket tighter and close your eyes, even as your heart keeps one ear open for the soft, steady rhythm of your baby's breathing. You'll take tomorrow as it comes. Through it all you keep moving. You don't get to rest, truly rest, until every child is asleep, the fire is safe, and you've said your nightly prayers. You know that in the morning, the struggle will begin again. Bread must be baked, water drawn, wood chopped, and you must be alert for every cough, rash, or fever. The routine is exhausting, but it's the only defense you have against a world that seems determined to rob you of your joy. If you're lucky, you'll wake to the sound of your children's laughter, not their cries. If not, you'll do what mothers here have always done. Grieve quickly, remember gently, and find a way to keep going. Maybe you'll plant a rosebush on a tiny grave or tie a ribbon to the old oak at the edge of the fields. Maybe you'll whisper your child's name into the wind, trusting that somewhere, someone is listening. And if you wonder as you settle under your thin blanket, whether you're strong enough to face another day, remember this. You've already survived more than most people will ever know. Your story is written not in books, but in the quiet strength of every night you endure, every meal you stretch, every lullaby you sing. Tomorrow, the struggle begins again, but tonight, for these few hours, you and your child are safe. You wake before the sun, your body trained to react to every shift in the silence. A child's cough, the creak of the wind against the shutters, the lonely call of an owl. Your head aches with the kind of fatigue only mothers know, the kind that seeps into your bones. There's no such thing as a morning lie-in. If you're still in bed after dawn, something is probably wrong. Maybe with you, maybe with one of the little ones. You rise quietly, careful not to wake the baby in your arms. Your oldest son is already stirring on the pallet, eyes heavy, hair sticking up at wild angles. Outside, the world is all soft grey mist and dew, the village silent but for the clucking of restless chickens and the grumble of someone splitting wood across the lane. You stretch, feeling every muscle protest. Another day begins, and you can already sense that it will be long. You light the fire with practiced hands, coaxing the embers back to life, blowing gently, praying they catch. Because if the fire dies, everything gets harder. Breakfast, warmth, hope. The first thing you notice every morning are the graves. They cluster at the edge of your little village, the stones and wooden markers arranged in careful rows, most of them so small you could step over them without pausing. And you do pause. Sometimes you force yourself to stop just for a moment to remember. The names blur together after a while. There's Agnes, who lasted 3 winters. Thomas, who died before he could walk. Little Johanna, who never even got a name on her stone, just a date. Your feet know the way by heart. You've made this walk too many times. It's not just you. Every mother you know has stood at a grave, sometimes her own, sometimes a neighbour's, holding a handkerchief to her mouth and staring into the churned earth as if it might offer answers. Some of the graves are so fresh you can still see the mound. Others are so old the marker is worn smooth and the name, once carefully carved, is now just a suggestion, a rumour of who once was. If you listen to the old women, they'll tell you it used to be worse or maybe better, depending on the weather, the king, or whether the baker's wife is in a good mood. In the famine years, they say, the churchyard filled faster than the baker's oven. Mainstream historians confirm that periods of famine or pestilence could wipe out entire villages, leaving rows upon rows of tiny graves, the land remembering what the world tried to forget. There's something almost mathematical about it. For every child who survives, 2 do not. It's hard to count birthdays here. There are no cakes, no candles, not even a proper calendar in most homes. Instead, you measure your children's lives by seasons and losses. She survived the harsh winter, or he was born the year the old well went dry. You can't afford to think too far ahead. Every day your child lives is a day to be grateful for, but also a day closer to the next risk. You learn quickly to harden your heart just a little to every cough, every fever, every small silence that might be the beginning of the end. There are whispers in the village, always whispers. Some mothers will admit in quiet moments by the well or the bakehouse that they no longer name their babies right away. Why get attached, they reason, when half the time the little ones don't even make it through their first month? It sounds cold, but it's simply a shield. You still feel every loss, deep and raw, but sometimes you need to pretend you don't. Historians still argue about the depth of medieval maternal love. Some say mothers were emotionally detached as a survival mechanism. Others insist that love and grief were as fierce as ever, just hidden under thicker skin. You remember your own first loss, the way the village women gathered, hands rough but gentle, carrying a tiny shroud sewn from a bit of old linen. There was no time for proper grieving. The fields needed tending, the bread needed baking, and there were other mouths to feed. You found yourself going through the motions, the pain numbed by routine, until night fell and you were finally alone, and then the grief hit so hard it stole your breath. You learned then what every medieval mother knows: the world doesn't stop for your sorrow. Graveyards in your village are oddly beautiful at dawn. Dew glistens on the wildflowers that have crept in over the years, the stones covered in moss, the air heavy with the scent of earth and wet grass. Birds perch on the crosses singing as if they can't feel the weight of the loss all around them. Sometimes, if you're feeling brave, you bring your surviving children here and tell them stories about the ones who are gone. That was your sister's stone, you might say, pointing to a patch of bluebells. She had your eyes. The children listen quietly, too used to these visits to be afraid. Loss is simply part of their world. You're not alone in your grief, and that's both a comfort and a curse. It means you always have someone to lean on, someone who understands the silent language of mourning. How you look away when a new mother walks by, the way you press your lips together when someone asks how many children you have. But it also means you're never free of reminders. Every village festival, every church service, every passing day brings memories of what's been lost. One quirky fact. In some medieval European towns, mothers would plant a rose bush or a sapling at the grave of a lost child, believing that as long as the plant flourished, the child's soul was at peace. If the plant withered, superstition said the child's spirit was restless, and it became your solemn task to tend to the flowers, watering them with tears and hope. It's a ritual that makes perfect sense in a world where loss is constant and the boundaries between life and death are always blurred. As the sun rises, the village comes alive. The church bell tolls, and you cross yourself, remembering the names of the little ones who never got to hear its call. You join the other women at the well, buckets swinging, babies strapped to their backs or clinging to their skirts. Conversations drift from gossip to grief and back again. "Did you hear about Anna's boy?" someone whispers. "Gone in the night just like that." You shake your head, offering what comfort you can, but knowing there's nothing you can say that will really help. Sometimes, the only solace is in sharing the weight of sorrow. Mainstream historical fact. Parish records in many European regions from the 14th to 17th centuries show that in some places, families routinely lost 3 or 4 children for everyone who survived to adulthood. These weren't isolated tragedies, but the norm, a grim arithmetic that shaped every household. The result was a culture deeply steeped in mourning, but also in resilience. You had to keep going. You had to believe that the next child, the next season, the next prayer might tip the balance in your favour. There's another debate that bubbles up from time to time. Did this constant exposure to loss make medieval people numb, or did it simply make their love more desperate? Some say mothers learned to harden themselves, to invest less in each new child as a form of self-protection. Others argue the opposite, that every child became more precious, every milestone more significant, because it was won against such terrible odds. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. You finish your chores for the morning, the ache in your back now joined by the ache in your heart. You pass the graveyard again on your way to the fields, and this time you allow yourself a moment to remember. Maybe you murmur a prayer, or maybe you just let the memories wash over you. A laugh, a song, the feel of tiny fingers curled around your own. You carry these memories like invisible jewels, precious and private. And then you move on, because you have to. There are living children to care for, and they demand your attention, your love, your strength. You dry your eyes and set your jaw, steeling yourself for another day of work, another day of worry. You know that tonight, when the village sleeps, you'll steal another moment to mourn. But for now, you keep going. There are small moments of joy too. A baby's laugh, a child's first word, the rare luxury of a full meal. You learn to celebrate these moments, to hold on to them as tightly as you can. They are your armour against the darkness, your proof that life, no matter how fragile, is still worth fighting for. The older women in the village sometimes say that every grave is a story, every loss a lesson. You believe them. You've learned more about love and loss in your short life than some people do in a lifetime. You know the sharp sting of grief, but also the fierce joy of survival. You're part of a long line of mothers, stretching back generations, all of whom have known the pain of burying a child. It's a legacy you never wanted, but one you accept with as much grace as you can muster. And when you see a new mother in the village, clutching her baby with wide, anxious eyes, you offer her the only comfort you know. A gentle touch, a whispered blessing, the promise that she's not alone. As the day wears on, the sun climbs higher, burning off the morning mist and turning the village into a patchwork of gold and green. Children's laughter rings out across the fields, a sound so precious you almost want to bottle it up and save it for the long dark nights. You watch them play, your heart swelling with equal parts pride and fear. You know too well how quickly joy can turn to sorrow. Historians still argue about the true impact of so much loss on the medieval psyche. Did it breed fatalism, Or did it spark a deeper appreciation for life's fleeting beauty? Did it drive people closer together, or did it push them apart? The truth is, you suspect that it did a little of both. Some days you feel so strong you could move mountains, and other days you're so weary you can barely stand. As dusk falls and the village settles into its evening routines, you find yourself back at home, children gathered around the hearth, the baby asleep in your arms. You think of the graves at the edge of the village, the ones you passed in the morning, and you say a silent prayer for the little souls resting there. Maybe you light a candle, maybe you just sit quietly for a while, letting the memories come and go like waves. Life goes on because it must. Tomorrow you'll rise before the sun again, you'll do your chores, you'll count your blessings, and you'll carry your grief like a hidden scar. But tonight, as you watch your children sleep, you allow yourself a rare moment of peace. For now, everyone you love is safe. And in this small, precious window, you remember that every grave is a reminder, not just of loss, but of love. Of all the hopes and dreams you poured into each tiny life, of the strength it takes to keep going, day after day, in a world that so often seems determined to break you. You are a medieval mother, and your story is written in both sorrow and survival. You've made it through another night, and that's a victory in itself. The morning light leaks through the gaps in your shutters, illuminating the edges of your crowded cottage. You hear the rooster crow, a sound that's supposed to signal a fresh start, but to you, it's just a reminder that there's no rest for mothers, not even for a heartbeat. The baby fusses in your arms, rooting blindly for milk, her tiny fists opening and closing in desperate hope. You're tired in a way that feels like it's been accumulating for centuries, as if you carry the fatigue of every mother who's ever lived before you. Today you'll begin again, because that's what mothers do. There's flour to knead, laundry to scrub, and a floor to sweep, though the wind will just blow the dirt straight back in. But before you get lost in chores, there's something urgent, something precious and perilous. The cradle. The baby is barely a week old, cheeks red and soft, breath so fragile it seems a miracle every time you see her chest rise. She's not your first, but you watch her with a superstitious awe, as if by force of will alone you might keep her alive. Everyone knows the cradle is full of peril. There's a reason for your anxiety. Every mother you know has horror stories. The child who went to sleep and never woke up, the one who choked on his own breath, or the toddler who tumbled out of bed and struck his head on the stone floor. The world, it seems, is booby-trapped for the unwary. Mainstream historians say that in some regions of medieval Europe, up to 20% of newborns died within their first month of life. Sometimes it's illness, sometimes it's accident, sometimes it's just the mysterious cruelty of fate. You look at your makeshift cradle, a wooden box padded with rags, maybe lined with a sheepskin if you're lucky. There's no such thing as a safe sleep environment here. The baby's bed is as likely to be a basket, a drawer, or a corner of your own straw pallet. Soft bedding can suffocate, but cold drafts can kill. You do your best, tucking her in with a ragged scrap of blanket, whispering the same charm your mother used. Sleep tight, don't wander far tonight. It's a little joke, but it's also a little prayer. But the dangers aren't just in the cradle, they're everywhere. There's the fire pit, always a temptation to curious toddlers. The door, which doesn't latch properly, letting in rats and drafts in equal measure. The water bucket, which seems to invite accidents. And of course, older siblings, sometimes more danger than help. You watch your older daughter, not much more than a child herself, rocking the cradle and singing off key. She doesn't realise that the world sees her as part caretaker, part risk. If you need to leave the baby even for a moment, you wedge the cradle close to the hearth for warmth, but far enough away that she can't roll into the ashes. You prop a broom across the doorway, not to keep out people, but to keep out spirits, or so the story goes. A broom at the door, and death will pass you by, your grandmother said. Historians still debate whether these superstitions made any real difference. Did the broom keep away the plague, or was it just an excuse to always know where the broom was? You check the baby's breathing again. You try not to, but you can't help it. The older mothers in the village call it crib watching, and they joke that you'll never sleep again once you've lost a child in the night. You smile at the joke, but there's a secret dread behind your eyes. Losing a child to the night death, what later ages might call sudden infant death syndrome, haunts every woman here. No one understands why it happens, but everyone fears it. Sometimes, the only defense is to keep the baby in your bed, tucked close between you and your husband. It's warmer, but it's also riskier. The priest rails against it on Sundays. God gave each soul its time, but you know he's never tried to keep a baby alive through a February freeze. Sometimes you wake to find the baby's lips blue and cold, her skin clammy. If you're lucky, a little rubbing and warming brings her back. If not, the village gathers again, shrouds are sewn, and another marker is planted at the edge of the graveyard. Some mothers weep openly, some go silent for days, and a few, usually the ones who've lost the most, go back to their chores as if nothing has happened. It's not coldness, it's survival. If you let every loss break you, you'd never get out of bed. But there are joys too. The first time your baby grasps your finger, the sweet milky smell of her breath, the way she coos and kicks her feet when you sing. Every smile is a little miracle, every milestone a reason to hope. You try to savour these moments, to memorise the shape of her tiny hands, the curl of her hair, the sound of her laughter. These memories are your treasures, hidden away against the darkness of the world. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, mothers placed iron keys or knives near the cradle to ward off evil spirits. It sounds dangerous. Knives and babies. But the belief was that iron repelled malevolent forces. Sometimes you tie a red ribbon around the baby's wrist for luck, or sprinkle salt in the corners of the room to keep the fairies at bay. Every village has its rituals. Historians still argue over the origins of these customs. Were they borrowed from ancient pagan rites, or did they spring from the sheer desperation of women who had nothing but hope and a handful of charms to keep their children safe? You see it in your friends too. Your neighbour, Margareta, lost 2 children last winter, one to fever, the other to a fall. She wept for a week, then gathered herself, planted a row of violets by their grave, and went back to hauling water for the cows. She tells you that after her losses she prays twice as hard, and sometimes she thinks she hears her children's voices in the wind. You nod, because you know that feeling. It's as if every child you lose leaves a piece of themselves behind, woven into the very air you breathe. As your baby grows, new dangers emerge. Crawling means exploring, and exploring means risk. There's the open hearth, the slop bucket, the sharp edge of the spinning wheel. You try to baby-proof as best you can, but in a one-room cottage, hazards outnumber hiding places. Sometimes you feel like a sentry on constant patrol, always on the lookout for the next threat. You joke with other mothers that if you had a penny for every near miss, you'd be richer than the Baron. Meals are another ordeal. The baby's first solid food is a terrifying milestone. Will she choke, or will she swallow safely? There are no purees here, no little jars of mashed peas. You feed her bits of bread soaked in broth, or a little mashed turnip. Sometimes you chew the food first yourself, softening it before offering it to her. It's an old trick, one you learned from your own mother. Historians still debate whether this custom spread disease or helped protect against choking. No one knows for sure, but it feels right. Besides, it's not as if you have a choice. When illness strikes, you do what you can. You try honey for a cough, chamomile for fever, a poultice of crushed herbs for bruises. Some remedies seem to work, others are just desperate hope made visible. If things get really bad, you call the village healer, an old woman with a pouch of dried roots and a sharp tongue. She'll mutter a prayer, burn a scrap of wool, and tell you to keep the baby warm. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Mainstream fact. Childhood accidents were a major cause of death in medieval Europe, right alongside disease and malnutrition. In a world without safety rails or plastic outlet covers, life was lived on the edge. And if something did happen, there were no ambulances, no hospitals, just a mother's hands, a healer's herbs, and hope. As your child grows, you watch every new skill with a mixture of pride and terror. Walking means more independence, but also more ways to get into trouble. You warn your toddler not to play near the well, not to chase the chickens, not to wander into the woods. Sometimes she listens, sometimes she doesn't. And when she falls or gets a bump, you kiss the hurt and send her back out, praying silently that this will not be the day that ends in tears and grave digging. You find camaraderie with other mothers. You gather at the well or the bakehouse, sharing stories, advice, and sometimes confessions. I left the baby alone for just a second, one woman says. Came back and she'd crawled halfway to the fire. There's laughter, nervous, exhausted laughter, because everyone knows how easily disaster can strike. Sometimes you swap remedies, sometimes you swap warnings, but mostly you offer each other the simple gift of understanding. Only another mother knows the particular ache of waiting to see if a fever will break or a cough will fade. Historians still argue whether this sense of shared struggle made women closer or simply kept them afloat. Did it breed competition? Whose child was healthiest? Who survived the longest? Or did it create a quiet, powerful solidarity? You think it did both. Sometimes envy creeps in when another woman's baby thrives while yours falters, but more often you find comfort in knowing you're not alone in your worry, your love, or your loss. Nights are the hardest. The darkness presses in, the wind howls around the corners, and every sound makes you jump. You check the cradle over and over, making sure your baby is breathing. Sometimes you bring her into your bed, tucking her close, feeling her heartbeat against your own. You know the risks, but you also know the cold can kill as surely as any sickness. You whisper prayers, charms, and sometimes just nonsense. Anything to keep the darkness at bay. And in those quiet hours when the world is still and your child sleeps in your arms, you let yourself dream. Maybe she'll grow strong and clever. Maybe she'll outlast all the dangers the world can throw at her. Maybe, just maybe, she'll survive to adulthood, and you'll get to see her grow, marry, and have children of her own. It's a fragile hope, but it's what keeps you going. You promise yourself and her that you'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe, even if it means believing in charms and old wives' tales, even if it means fighting off your own fear day after day. You're a medieval mother, and every night your child survives is a tiny shining victory. Tomorrow the risks will come again. The cradle full of peril, the house full of hazards, the world full of danger. But tonight, you have her, and that's enough. You're up before the rooster this time because your baby is fretful and hungry, and the room is already colder than you'd like. The cottage is dark, just a hint of grey along the edges of the shuttered window. You fumble for the clay cup and the half-full bucket by the hearth. Milk, if the cow gave any last night. Your hands shake a little. You hope the water's still clean, that the bucket hasn't gathered any floating dust or, worse, a dead mouse. Feeding your baby is a daily ritual of risk, a mixture of hope and ancient guesswork, and it's never simple. The most basic thing, keeping a child alive with food and drink, should be easy, you'd think. Not here, not now. In the medieval world, milk itself is a gamble. If you can breastfeed, that's a blessing, though your diet is so thin that sometimes your milk dries up, or the baby seems restless no matter how long she nurses. Some women, your neighbour Alice for one, can't nurse at all, or lose their milk when fever hits, or after a hard childbirth. For them, feeding means turning to the animals, and animal milk is another gamble. Sometimes it spoils, sometimes it's too rich or too thin, sometimes it carries sickness. You scoop a little milk into a wooden spoon and offer it to the baby, hoping she'll take it. She fusses, spits, tries again. You catch yourself holding your breath until she finally settles and swallows. This part, the feeding, the drinking, the coaxing, is always tense. You remember your mother's warnings. Don't use the pond water, boil it if you can. But boiling means firewood, and firewood is precious. Sometimes you risk it. Sometimes you pray over the cup and trust luck. There are plenty of dangers here that the village men never think about. Your cousin lost a child last spring to bad milk, a polite phrase for what was probably dysentery. Mainstream historical fact. Waterborne diseases killed more children in medieval Europe than almost anything else. You hear it in the whispers at the well, in the cautious way women glance at their water buckets, in the desperate hope that the old well on the edge of town isn't poisoned by the graves next to it. Historians still argue whether these fears were exaggerated, or if most village wells really did make as many children sick as they saved. Either way, you're careful as you can afford to be, but you can't do everything. Sometimes the milk turns and you don't realise until the child is doubled over with pain, or you wake in the night to hear her whimpering. There's not much to do except offer her a little mint tea or honey water, if you have it. Sometimes you try things that seem a little mad. A spoonful of stale beer, a poultice of onion and vinegar pressed to her belly, a charm whispered over her crib, and then there are the remedies that make even you raise an eyebrow, like the time old Goody Cartwright insisted you feed your daughter a boiled spider, mashed up in a little bread to cure the belly demons. You refused, but Alice tried it with her son. He got better, or maybe he just wasn't that sick to begin with. No one can say for sure. It's hard to know what works and what's just luck. The line between medicine and magic here is as blurry as the early morning light. Some swear by their family's secrets, herbs and brews, chants and prayers. Others put their faith in the new priest's holy water, or the village healer's thick, bitter syrups. Sometimes the things that seem most outlandish are the only things left to try when you're desperate. Quirky tidbit. In some places, mothers would mix poppy seeds into milk to help their babies sleep. Never mind the danger of poisoning, which nobody really understood. You've never tried that one. The risks seem worse than the reward. But you have heard of pigeon broth for colic and hedgehog fat for coughs. Every woman you know has her own list of do's and don'ts, her own stories of miracles and mistakes. Sometimes, when the baby refuses food, you remember what happened to the neighbour's child. A story retold with shivers. He just stopped eating, the women whisper, as if something had stolen his appetite. The village healer called it elf shot, blaming invisible arrows from fairies or malicious spirits. Your mother used to say, "There's always a reason, but we can't always see it." Historians still argue whether stories like elf shot were simply a way to explain the unexplainable, or if they helped communities cope with the random cruelties of infant illness. You learn to watch your baby closely. Is she crying with hunger or with pain? Is her skin too warm or her breath too shallow? You listen for the tiny cues, sounds only a mother can decode. Sometimes when the baby is restless for days, you try everything. New food, new prayers, even new neighbours' advice. Some days nothing works. That's the hardest part. Knowing you can do everything right and still lose. You tell yourself it's not your fault, but in the dark hours you wonder. Sometimes you can't help but feel a twinge of envy for women in the manor house, with their wet nurses and pantries full of food. But you know that even the rich lose children. Perhaps not as many, but no one is safe. Disease and bad luck do not care about status, only about opportunity. Still, you can't help but wonder how different it would feel to never worry about your child starving. There are good days, though. Days when the baby latches on, when the water is sweet and clear, when the bread rises perfectly, and you have enough to eat that you can feed her as much as she wants. On those days, you feel hope stirring in your chest. You look at her little hands and imagine them growing big and strong, able to work and weave and carry a basket to market. You imagine her with children of her own. But then she coughs, and the worry comes rushing back. You spend so much time thinking about food and water that it becomes almost an obsession. You plan meals in your head, counting every crumb. You remember which neighbour has a cow in milk, which one lost a goat, which garden might have a few extra turnips. Sometimes you trade chores for food, mending a neighbour's dress for a piece of cheese, helping with the harvest in exchange for apples. It's never enough, but you make do. And then there are the feast days, times when the whole village comes together to share what little they have. The table groans with bread and meat and ale, and the children run wild, faces flushed and sticky with honey. On those days you let yourself relax, you watch your baby eat, laugh with the other mothers, and pretend, just for a little while, that hunger is something you've left behind. You know it won't last, but you take the joy where you can find it. You also learn the subtle art of negotiating with your baby, singing to coax her into eating, rocking her when she's stubborn, trying every trick you know to get her to swallow a few more mouthfuls. You sing the old lullabies, sometimes forgetting the words and making up new ones on the spot. The songs are part comfort, part magic spell. You believe, a little, that the right tune can chase away sickness. In the evenings, when the chores are done and the sky's deep blue outside the window, you sit by the fire and watch your baby sleep. She's full for now, her cheeks rosy, her breaths deep and even. You feel a surge of relief. For tonight at least, you've done your job. Tomorrow will bring new risks, new challenges, but tonight she is safe and satisfied. And then there are the nights when nothing works. When the baby cries and cries, and you run through every remedy, every prayer, every bit of wisdom handed down from mother to mother. You pace the floor, singing, rocking, hoping she'll finally settle. When she doesn't, you worry. Is it something you fed her? Something you didn't? A sickness you didn't see coming? The guilt is heavy, almost as heavy as the child in your arms. You remember stories, half remembered and half believed, about changelings, fairy children swapped for your own in the night. Some women swear by hanging iron scissors over the crib or scattering salt on the threshold. You do it too, sometimes, just in case. Historians still debate if this was a way to make sense of colic, of failure to thrive, of the endless mysteries of infant health. But there are victories, small ones, a new tooth breaking through, the first time she giggles at your funny face, the day she sits up on her own. Every milestone is a battle won, a reason to hope. You share your triumphs with the other mothers, each one a tiny rebellion against the odds. It never really gets easier. Feeding a child is always a risk, a calculation between what you have and what you wish you had, between what you know and what you fear. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but every day you try again because that's what mothers do. At the end of another long day, you settle your baby in her cradle, brush her forehead with a kiss, and whisper another prayer. You thank whatever gods or spirits are listening for another day together, and you promise silently to keep fighting for her, no matter what tomorrow brings. You know the risks are never truly gone. Bad milk, bad water, bad luck, they're always waiting. But so is hope, so is love, and so are you. You awaken to the sound of coughing, not just the quiet, chesty cough you expect from a cold night in a damp house, but something sharper, deeper, more troubling. It's the baby, and the sound pierces the thin quiet of dawn like a warning bell. You sit up quickly, heart pounding. There's no such thing as sleeping in for a medieval mother, not when illness is always lurking in the shadows. You reach for her, feeling her hot cheeks and clammy neck. This isn't her first cough, and you know all too well it might not be her last. The morning is cold, and your breath mists in the faint grey light. The hearth fire needs coaxing, and the whole cottage feels heavy with dampness and worry. You remember every warning from your mother and every story whispered over the village well. Disease is everywhere, and it doesn't care how hard you pray or how well you try. Mainstream historians tell us that childhood diseases, smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, and a whole host of others that nobody even named, were as common as rain and twice as relentless. Before the age of modern medicine, a single cough could spiral into a funeral in just a few days. You wrap your baby tightly, hoping warmth will ease her breathing. But the truth is, you're not sure what to do. There are no doctors here, at least not the sort with fancy tools and proper training. If you're lucky, there's a midwife with some experience or a healer with a pouch full of dried herbs and a memory for old remedies. Otherwise, you rely on whatever knowledge the women of your family have gathered over the years. For fever, you might brew a tea from willow bark. For a rash, you mash up comfrey leaves and rub them on her skin. For a cough, you try honey or onion broth, whispering the little rhyme that's supposed to drive the bad air away. Sometimes the old tricks work. Sometimes the baby's cough fades after a day or two, and you thank every saint and spirit you know. Other times, the cough gets worse, turning into a wheeze, then a rattle, then silence. That silence is the most terrifying thing of all, the moment when the world stands still and you wait to see if your child will draw another breath. You try to keep your cottage clean, sweeping the floor, chasing out the chickens, airing out the bedding, but you know it's a losing battle. There's no real way to keep disease out when it's everywhere. In the air, in the water, on the hands of your neighbour's children. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers understood the idea of contagion in any scientific sense. But you know that when someone in the village gets sick, everyone gets sick. When a neighbour's child comes down with spots or fever, you keep your children inside as much as you can. But the village is small and everyone is connected. If sickness is in one house, it's soon in all of them. There are stories, always stories, about why some children survive and others don't. Some say it's luck, some say it's the will of God, some blame curses or bad spirits. You find yourself wondering, late at night, if you've done something wrong, if some forgotten sin is being punished through your child. Your friend Emma, who lost 3 babies in a single winter, swears by holy water and daily prayers. Your cousin swears by keeping onions under the cradle and never letting a visitor kiss the baby's face. There are as many remedies as there are mothers, and none of them seem to work every time. A quirky tidbit. In some places, mothers hung little bags of garlic and wolf's teeth around their children's necks, convinced these would ward off evil spirits, or the bad air that carried disease. You've tried it too, why not? At this point you'll try anything. Historians still debate whether these customs came from pagan traditions, or if they were desperate attempts to make sense of the senseless. You know only that when your child is sick, logic goes out the window. You'd hang the moon over her cradle if you thought it would help. Sometimes, when sickness sweeps the village, the church bells toll for days, one for every small coffin carried up the hill. You try not to count, but you always do. You remember each name, each little face, and you clutch your baby tighter, hoping she won't be next. The graveyard at the edge of the village is crowded with tiny markers, most of them so fresh the grass hasn't yet had a chance to grow back. You wonder if the land will ever forget all these children, or if it will always whisper with the sound of their laughter lost too soon. You do what you can. You bathe your child in warm water mixed with herbs, you sing songs and recite prayers, you keep her close and warm. When things are really bad, you call in the healer or the priest, and you offer what little you can, a loaf of bread, a few eggs, in exchange for help. Sometimes the healer brings relief, sometimes just comfort. Sometimes there's nothing anyone can do. Mainstream fact: even royalty wasn't safe from childhood disease. Monarchs lost children to the same fevers and poxes that haunted every peasant's home. Death did not care about wealth or status. If anything, crowded castles and constant visitors often made matters worse. You tell yourself that as you rock your sick baby. If queens can lose their children, what chance do you have? Sometimes the disease takes more than one child at a time. Families are left with empty arms and too much silence. You see it in the faces of your neighbours, in the haunted eyes of the mothers at church. You know they're all thinking the same thing. Will I be next? Is it my turn this time? Your other children grow quiet when sickness comes. They help more, fuss less, moving softly around the cottage as if afraid to draw attention from whatever spirit or fate is hovering in the rafters. You see how quickly they learn to read your face, how carefully they watch for signs of hope or despair. They've learned too early how fragile life can be. You think back to your own childhood, how your mother seemed so strong, so sure. Only now do you realise she was just as scared as you are, just as desperate to keep her children safe. You remember her stories, her remedies, the way she'd sing you to sleep even when her voice was tired and rough from worry. Now, it's your turn to be the strong one, to pretend you aren't afraid even as you pray with every breath. There are moments of hope. Sometimes the fever breaks, the rash fades, the cough lessens. You celebrate every small victory. Every bowl of porridge your child manages to eat, every laugh, every step. You don't take any of it for granted. Every day she survives feels like a gift, hard-won and precious. But there are losses too. The village buries another child, and the world goes on as if nothing has happened. You go through the motions, tending to chores, feeding the animals, keeping the cottage running. But inside, you're grieving. You share a quiet look with the other mothers, a look that says, "I know. I'm sorry. I'm scared too." Historians still debate whether medieval mothers became numb to loss, or if they grieved every child as fiercely as we do today. You know the answer in your own heart. Every loss is a wound that never truly heals. You learn to carry the pain with you, to hide it behind smiles and laughter, but it's always there. On the worst days, you wonder why you keep trying. Why risk loving when loss is so likely? But then your child smiles at you, or wraps her little hand around your finger, and you remember. Love is worth the risk. Hope is stubborn, refusing to die even when the odds are long. You keep going because you have to. Because your children need you. Because you promised your mother you would. Because every night you get to hold your child is a victory, no matter how brief. As night falls again, you rock your baby by the fire, singing the same old lullabies your mother sang to you. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but for now, your child is safe. For now she breathes, and so do you. You listen to her breath, soft and steady, and let yourself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'll be one of the lucky ones. The sun barely crests the trees when you realise you haven't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. Your stomach grumbles, a distant echo compared to the louder worry gnawing at your mind. Hunger, cold, and the constant threat that the little food you have might not last the week. You look around your cottage, noting the nearly empty bread bin, the last dried apples strung up in the rafters, and the thin soup simmering on the fire. More water than anything, really. This isn't just a hard day. It's the shape of your life. The price of being poor, you realise again and again, is paid in uncertainty, in anxiety, and most cruelly in children's lives. You step outside into the crisp morning, wrapping your threadbare cloak tighter. The village is slow to wake. People save their energy when the food runs short. You hear the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer, a bark from a hungry dog, the wheeze of an old man splitting wood. All around you, the signs of poverty are everywhere. Roofs patched with straw and rags, chickens scratching for bugs where crops failed to grow, children with hollow cheeks and bright, wary eyes. These are not the images you see in grand illuminated manuscripts. No feasts, no golden goblets, no rosy-cheeked plump babies. Hunger is a constant companion, and for many, a death sentence. You make your way to the village square, passing neighbours who nod in solidarity. No one needs to say they're hungry. It's in the slump of their shoulders and the caution with which they look at each other's baskets. Everyone's trying to stretch what little they have. You swap a few words with Agnes, who's cradling a child so thin you can see her ribs. She tries to smile, but it doesn't quite reach her eyes. You both know the truth. The poorest families bury the most children. Mainstream historians point out that malnutrition was one of the most persistent killers of medieval children. Without enough to eat, especially during the hungry gap in late winter and early spring when last year's stores are nearly gone and the new crops haven't come in, babies and toddlers weaken quickly. Their bodies can't fight off disease or survive even a mild fever. It isn't just that there's no food, it's that every meal is a gamble. Is that bread too old, too mouldy? Will the thin gruel be enough to quiet their hunger, let alone help them grow? You head for the fields, hoping to glean a few forgotten turnips or scavenge some greens. Sometimes you pick nettles for soup, painful work but necessary. You keep an eye out for edible roots or mushrooms, careful to remember the warnings. Some mushrooms kill as quickly as any fever. Historians still argue whether the poorest peasants were skilled foragers, or if desperation often led to fatal mistakes. You suspect both are true. The stories you've heard of whole families dying from eating devil's bread made with poisonous ergot fungus, or from berries picked in error are enough to give you pause every time you search the hedgerows. Your children trail behind you, scrawny and silent. You try to hide your worry, humming an old tune as you search. Every berry is precious, every wild onion a small victory. When you're lucky, a neighbour shares a handful of barley or a scrap of salted pork. Most days you all go to bed with bellies that ache, but not as much as your heart does. There's a subtle math to survival here, and it always seems to work against you. If you eat too much today, there won't be enough for tomorrow. If you save the best for the children, you weaken yourself. Then who will care for them? If you work too hard, you burn through precious energy. If you don't work enough, you starve. The balancing act is relentless. Quirky tidbit. Some villages kept a hunger stone at the edge of the fields, carved with warnings from previous generations. If you see me, weep. The stone was meant to mark the level the river fell during the worst droughts and famines, a grim reminder that nature's cruelty outlasts memory. When the river dropped and the stone emerged, everyone knew to brace for hunger and loss. You once touched the hunger stone as a child and remember your mother weeping quietly afterward. You recall how, in better years, the village would pool food for the poorest. There'd be a poor man's pot, a stew that everyone added to so nobody starved entirely. But in lean years, charity dries up, and every household looks inward, protecting their own. Historians still argue about how much community support really existed in the Middle Ages. Was charity a myth, or did it ebb and flow with the times? You know the answer is complicated. People help when they can, but hunger makes everyone wary. The cold is just as dangerous. Winters are long, and the wind cuts through every crack in the wall. You wrap your baby in whatever scraps you can find. A shawl from your grandmother, a bit of wool from last year's shearing. Still, you worry every night. Will she wake up shivering, or not at all? You've heard stories of mothers waking to find their child cold and still beside them, the life gone out in the night. Sometimes it's called the cold death, sometimes sleeping sickness, but everyone knows what it really is: poverty's toll. You try to keep your home as warm as possible. You stuff rags in the windows, huddle together at night, and do your best to keep the fire alive. But firewood is scarce. Some days you burn old furniture, bits of fence, or whatever you can scavenge. The smoke stings your eyes, but it's better than freezing. Your oldest child, barely 8, helps as much as she can. She fetches water, gathers kindling, even tries to soothe the baby when you're busy. You marvel at her strength, but mourn her lost childhood. She should be playing, not worrying, but you know that every able hand helps keep the family alive. When illness comes, it finds easy prey in hungry children. Even a simple cold can turn deadly. You've seen it happen. A sniffle turns to fever, then to silence. You remember last winter when your neighbour's twins died within a week of each other. Their mother hasn't smiled since. You brought her soup and company, but nothing helped. Grief lingers in every corner of the village, a silent shadow that never really leaves. The cycle repeats: hunger, cold, sickness, loss, and yet you keep going. You plant your little patch of garden every spring, hoping for enough rain and just enough sun. Sometimes a good harvest brings relief, and the children grow rounder, livelier. For a few months you dare to hope. Historians point out that even small changes, an extra piglet surviving, a better crop of beans, a mild winter, could tip the balance between life and death. You've seen it yourself. One lucky year means fewer graves, more laughter. You rely on faith, though sometimes it feels like faith is just another word for hope in the face of odds you can't change. The priest tells you God rewards the humble and the patient. You pray for mercy, for strength, for a miracle. Sometimes it seems the only miracle is that you keep finding the strength to get up every morning and try again. There are moments when you feel the unfairness of it all in your bones. Why should your child suffer because the crops failed, or because the Lord raised the rent again? Sometimes you hear stories of distant lands where the rich dine on meat every day, where children never go hungry. You wonder if those places are real or just stories to keep hope alive. But there's no time for bitterness. You have children to feed, water to haul, fields to tend. You do what you must. Trade, borrow, beg, even steal if you have to. Survival makes its own rules, and mothers are the first to break them when it means keeping a child alive. Quirky fact: some mothers in desperate times have been known to feed their children broth made from boiled shoe leather or tree bark. It sounds impossible, but you know the truth. Hunger makes you inventive. You'd eat almost anything to keep your child from crying with hunger. Still, there's a certain pride in surviving. Every winter you make it through, every child you keep alive, every tiny harvest is a badge of honour. The village women share these victories quietly, around the well or over a shared crust of bread. We made it through another year, they say, and the words mean everything. Sometimes you wonder what it's all for. The work is endless, the rewards so fleeting. But then your baby smiles at you, or your oldest child brings you a handful of wild strawberries, and you remember it's for them. For the hope that they'll have a better life, that someday the hunger will end. You teach your children to be resourceful, to help each other, to be grateful for every mouthful. You tell them stories of better times and whisper encouragement when they cry from hunger. You remind them that they are loved, even when love is all you have left to give. Night falls, and you gather your family close, sharing the last of the day's food and warmth. You listen to your children's breathing, each soft sigh a small reassurance. You let yourself dream of spring, of full bellies and laughter. Historians still argue about what kept medieval peasants going. Was it faith, family, or sheer stubbornness? You think it's all three, plus something else, something fierce and quiet. The kind of courage that only comes from loving children who depend on you for everything. You fall asleep exhausted, knowing tomorrow will bring the same challenges. But you also know you'll meet them, because you have to. Because hunger, cold, and poverty haven't beaten you yet. And in that knowledge you find the strength to face another day. Morning again, though you could hardly call it a new beginning. Just a grey continuation of all the days that came before, and all the days that stretch out ahead. You wake to the cold, and the sound of little feet on the earthen floor, to coughing in the corner, to the baby's fretful cries that mean fever or hunger, or sometimes both. Some days, you feel every year you've lived pressing down on you, but the real weight is the mystery. Ailments with no names, illnesses no one can explain, and the ache of not knowing how to fight them. You cross to the pallet where your youngest lies, cheeks flushed, her body hot and trembling. In the dim light, she looks so small, and you fight the urge to panic. You've seen this before, in your own children and in the neighbours. A child who just wastes away, grows weaker day after day, refusing food, drifting in and out of sleep. Sometimes the end comes quickly, a sudden breathless night. Sometimes it's slower, a long dwindling, like a candle burning down to nothing. There are so many names for these things. The wasting sickness, bone fever, night chills, to gut rot. But none of them really say what's wrong. Sometimes the midwife shakes her head, shrugs and says, "It's God's will." Sometimes the village healer mutters about an imbalance of humours, or blames the weather, or points to a shadowy curse. Most often there are no answers at all. You've seen families try everything, herbs and prayers, honey and strong wine, fasting and feasting. Nothing works. Sometimes the child recovers for no reason. Sometimes she doesn't. Mainstream historical fact. Even today, historians and doctors debate what most medieval children actually died from. Was it dehydration from constant diarrhea, malnutrition, pneumonia, or something else? The records are maddeningly vague, filled with words like age and consumption that could mean a dozen different things. What's certain is that most deaths were swift, and mothers like you learned to spot the signs early. Sunken eyes, shallow breaths, the listless turning away from food or touch. You try to comfort your child, dabbing her forehead with a cloth dipped in cool water, singing the softest lullabies you can remember. Your voice shakes, but you keep going. It's all you can do. You offer her sips of water, bits of bread soaked in broth, a spoonful of honey if you have it. Sometimes she'll take it, sometimes not. You whisper encouragement, bargain with whatever powers might be listening. Please just let her stay. You remember the first time you heard the story of the changeling, the fairy child swapped for your own, who would sicken and fade no matter what you did. The story frightened you as a girl, but now you understand. It's just a way to make sense of the senseless. When medicine fails and prayers go unanswered, sometimes only stories remain. Historians still argue whether these tales gave comfort or just deepened the guilt of mothers who couldn't save their babies. Neighbours stop by with advice. One brings a sprig of rosemary, tied with a red thread, to drive out the fever. Another leaves a bowl of barley water, good for the belly. You accept each offering with thanks, knowing every woman is just trying to help. They all have stories. A cousin cured with elderberry syrup, a nephew who survived on nothing but goat's milk for a month. You try each remedy because you can't bear not to try. At night, you lie awake and watch your child's chest rise and fall, counting each breath as if it's a prayer. Sometimes, when you can't stand it, you slip outside to sit under the moon, hoping the cool air will clear your mind. You think of all the mothers in your village and beyond, all of you united in worry and hope and helplessness. Sometimes there are debates in the village square. It's the water from the new well, someone says. No, it's the bad air from the marsh, says another. It's the rats or the bread or the stars. You listen to them argue, wishing someone actually knew. Deep down, you suspect it's all of these things and none of them. The world is just a dangerous place for children, and for their mothers too. There's a superstition in your village. If a child wastes away, you should pass her 3 times under a bramble bush at dawn, then give her dew to drink. You try it, of course, even though you don't believe. There's another, tie a coin around her neck or place a knife under her pillow to ward off evil. Your grandmother swore by burning rosemary and sprinkling salt on the doorstep. Historians still debate whether these rituals were inherited from pagan times, invented out of desperation, or both. All you know is that it's better to do something than nothing. A quirky tidbit. Some mothers believed that a child with wasting sickness could be cured by borrowing a piece of bread from 7 houses and feeding it, crumb by crumb, to the sick child. It sounds strange, but you've tried it, hoping that the combined goodwill of your neighbours might tip the scales in your favour. Sometimes, in the face of illness, you wish for something you never say aloud. A miracle, a healer with true magic, a way to see inside your child and know what's wrong. But this is the Middle Ages, and you know better. All you have is your hands, your voice, and your endless, stubborn love. The midwife comes again, this time with a new suggestion. A hot poultice for the belly, a new tea for the fever, a blessing whispered over your child's head. She tries to reassure you. Sometimes they get better, she says. Sometimes they don't. Her honesty is both a comfort and a curse. You see the fear in your other children's eyes. They know what happens when a brother or sister grows quiet, when the adults stop smiling. You try to shield them, keep them busy with chores and little treats, a piece of fruit, a story by the fire. But they know. In this world, every child learns too early about loss. You remember all the children you've known who just faded away. The neighbour's boy, the girl from down the lane, even your own siblings buried long ago. You remember the way the village gathers for the little funerals, the quick prayers, the small shrouds. There's a certain rhythm to it all, a way of mourning that's at once public and deeply private. The pain is sharp at first, then dull, then just another stone in the sack you carry. But some children recover. One day, the fever breaks, the child opens her eyes, asks for bread, sits up. It feels like a resurrection, a miracle. You celebrate quietly, relief and joy mingling with guilt. Why did your child survive when others did not? You don't know, and you never will. Mainstream fact. Even now, historians and scientists study medieval skeletons for clues about childhood disease. They find signs of rickets, scurvy, tuberculosis, and all kinds of infections. The bones tell stories that the parish records never could, of children who suffered long before they died, of mothers who tried everything to save them. You tell yourself that you'll remember every moment of this, the sickness, the prayers, the hope, the fear, so you can help others when it's their turn. But you know too that memory is a tricky thing. Grief changes the way you remember, blurring details, softening some edges and sharpening others. When your child is sick, the days and nights blur together. You lose track of time, forget to eat, barely sleep. Your whole world shrinks to the size of your child's breathing, your own hope stretched thin. You pray, sometimes to God, sometimes to the spirits of your ancestors, sometimes to the universe itself. If your child dies, you do what every mother before you has done. You wash her gently, wrap her in the softest cloth you have, and say your goodbyes. You walk with your neighbours to the graveyard, stand in the cold wind and listen to the priest's words. Then you return home, quieter, heavier, and begin again. If your child lives, you give thanks in every way you know. Candles at church, gifts to the healer, prayers whispered into the night, and you vow never to take her laughter for granted again. Historians still argue whether medieval mothers were more resilient, more stoic, more accepting of loss. You know the truth. Mothers are mothers, everywhere and always. You learn to survive, to love in the face of loss, to find meaning where you can. You take comfort in small things. The way the sun feels on your back as you work, the smell of bread baking, the sound of your children playing on a rare, healthy day. You hold on to these moments, store them up against the next time illness comes, and you teach your children to do the same. You tell them stories, teach them to care for each other, show them how to gather herbs and make broth. You hope, fiercely, that they'll have fewer losses than you did, that the world will be kinder to them. But you know, deep down, that the world hasn't changed. Ailments with no names will always come, and mothers will always fight them with everything they have. You finish another day, exhausted but unbroken. You tuck your children in, sing them to sleep and sit by the fire, watching the shadows dance on the walls. You let yourself hope for another morning, another chance, another small victory in a world that offers no guarantees. And you promise, to your children and to yourself, that you'll never stop trying, no matter how many ailments, no matter how many names, no matter how many losses, because that's what mothers do. There's a strange hush in the cottage this morning, the kind that prickles your skin and makes you wary before you've even opened your eyes. The children are unusually quiet, whispering near the hearth while you dress the youngest. She's pale and weak, but for today at least, breathing easy. Still, you're on edge. You know how quickly that can change. You tuck a sprig of rosemary into her wrappings, not for the first time, and murmur the charm your mother taught you. Even now you don't know if you believe in magic. But after all you've survived, you're willing to try anything. You're not alone in your suspicions. The whole village has that same wariness about it. Side glances, muttered prayers, charms hanging in windows and over doors. When things go wrong for a child, or a mother loses 2 babies in a row, or a cow drops dead for no reason, the air grows thick with blame. In a world without certainty, people grasp at whatever explanations they can find, however strange or unfair. Today, you can almost feel the old stories crowding in around you. Witchcraft, curses, the blame games that start as whispers and sometimes end in tears, or worse. You send your oldest to fetch water from the well, but before she leaves, you quietly touch her shoulder and slip a little iron key into her pocket. Keep it close, you tell her. Iron, they say, keeps away bad spirits and jealous neighbours. She nods, wide-eyed, believing or at least pretending to. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were about protecting against real threats, or just giving comfort in a world where control was so hard to come by. You suspect it's both. If you can't control fate, at least you can feel like you're doing something. Outside, the village women gather as usual at the well. You join them, basket in hand, pretending to listen, as they gossip about hens that won't lay or weather that won't behave. But the talk quickly turns, inevitably, to misfortune. Anna's new baby has a strange birthmark. Someone's goat died in its sleep. Your neighbour, Marta, lost her youngest last week, and people are whispering that she brought it on herself. Maybe she crossed someone. Maybe she was careless with the old rules. Maybe someone is jealous or angry or just unlucky. A quirky tidbit. In some villages, mothers would quietly keep a little bag of ashes in the cradle, a fire charm against spells or curses cast by an envious neighbour. Some burned locks of the child's hair and scattered the ashes at crossroads to confuse spirits or witches. You've seen it done and even tried it yourself once, when your second child wasted away despite every herb and prayer. Did it help? Who knows? But it gave you something to do besides cry. The village priest, sensing tension in the air, has started preaching more fiercely about sin and temptation. He warns the women to keep their eyes open, to avoid strange gatherings, and to pray harder. There's always someone to blame. Too many stillbirths, too many children fading away, and suddenly the old stories are on everyone's lips. Maybe it's that old woman at the edge of the wood, the one with too many cats and too few visitors. Maybe it's the young girl who spurned a suitor. Maybe it's you, if you're unlucky. Historians still debate the real causes of these witch panics and blame games. Were they ways to explain the unexplainable, or excuses for jealousy and old grudges to boil over? You only know what you see. When children die, suspicion blooms, mothers grow watchful, even friends keep their distance. It doesn't always come to violence, but the fear is sharp. You remember when the last accusation flew, years ago now, but no one forgets. They said the midwife had cursed a child who'd been slow to walk. She was questioned, shunned, nearly driven from the village until another child, healthy and loud, was born to the accuser, and the story faded. Still, you keep your head down. You never speak too openly about bad luck. You hide your fear, your tears, your prayers for protection. You try to remember that not everything can be blamed on curses or evil eyes. Sometimes tragedy is just tragedy. But it's hard not to look for reasons, especially when the pain is so raw and the answers so few. You remember how after you lost your first baby, an old woman pressed a blue bead into your hand and told you to pin it to your child's shirt, to blind the evil eye. You wore that bead for years, even after it cracked and faded. Your children sense the tension too. They grow quiet when neighbours visit, cling to you when you go to the well, avoid the corners of the village where the witch woman lives. You want to reassure them, to tell them that no one can really curse them. But you're not sure. The world is full of mysteries, and mothers must navigate them all. A neighbour's daughter falls ill and the gossip turns ugly. Some say she angered a spirit in the woods. Others claim her mother borrowed bread without returning the favour. A few whisper that she was seen at the crossroads at midnight, always a sign of trouble. The girl's mother grows pale and silent, shunned by some, pitied by others. You try to offer comfort, but you know words won't help. Fear has its own logic. Quirky fact. Some villages believe that a child could be cursed by praise. If you admired a baby's rosy cheeks or clever laugh, you were supposed to spit on the ground or touch wood to ward off jealousy. Compliments were double-edged, both blessing and risk. You find yourself careful with your words, even to your friends. You remember another time, years ago, when your cow died after a neighbour's visit. For weeks you found small offerings, a feather, a stone, a bit of bread, left on your doorstep. Gifts or warnings, you were never sure. You made peace with your neighbour just in case. Better safe than sorry. Historians still argue how much these fears shaped daily life. Did they keep people apart, or just bind them closer together in the face of danger? You suspect it's both. You've seen suspicion break friendships and build alliances. You've seen mothers forgive and mothers turn away. You do what you can to protect your family. You mark the door with chalk at Epiphany. You hang a sprig of rowan over the cradle. You say your prayers, loud enough for the neighbours to hear. If someone looks at your child too long, you gently change the subject or quietly brush your fingers through her hair. Another charm, another shield. At home, you remind your children not to boast, not to draw attention, not to accept gifts from strangers. You teach them the old sayings. See a pin, pick it up, and all day you'll have good luck. If you see a magpie alone, tip your hat and say good morning. Superstitions, all of them. But when the world is so uncertain, small rituals give comfort. You hope your children will grow up with more answers than you had, that someday people will understand why children get sick, why crops fail, why luck comes and goes. For now, all you have are stories, prayers, and the love that keeps you fighting no matter what. You tuck your youngest in for the night, smoothing her hair and whispering a blessing. The house is quiet, but outside you hear the wind, the sound of distant voices, the restless shifting of the village. You lock the door, place the broom across the threshold, and light a candle to keep the darkness at bay. As you lie down, you remember all the mothers before you, all the children lost and saved, all the blame and forgiveness and hope woven through every family. You promise yourself you'll keep your head down, keep your heart strong, keep loving your children with every ounce of your being. Tomorrow will bring new dangers, new fears, new blame games. But for tonight, you are together, safe within these walls you've built from faith, love, and just a little bit of magic. You wake to the smell of smoke, just the usual thin curl from the hearth, but today it mingles with something sharp, the tang of dried rosemary and the sweetness of honey melting into the morning's meagre bread. Another day, another round of mother's remedies and fatal fables. In this village, every woman carries a mental library of cures, tricks and charms passed down by mothers, aunts and grandmothers. Some you know by heart, others you learn only in moments of desperation. You begin your day as you always do, mixing what you hope is a healing brew for your youngest, whose cough lingers like a stubborn guest. You crush dried chamomile and yarrow, pouring boiling water over them in a battered cup. If you're lucky, she'll sip it without fuss. But you don't just rely on herbs. There are other remedies, older ones, sometimes whispered rather than spoken aloud. This morning Anna comes knocking, her face drawn and weary. She carries a pouch of something foul-smelling. Crushed garlic and ox bile, she says, wrinkling her nose. For fever, my mother swore by it. You accept it with a nod, tucking it away for later. It might help, or it might just keep the neighbours at arm's length with its stench. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was an unpredictable mix of genuine herbal knowledge, hopeful guesswork, and elaborate superstition. Physicians and wise women alike prescribed remedies that sometimes helped, but just as often did nothing, or worse. Many ailments, especially in children, were treated by balancing the body's humours with bloodletting, purgatives, or bizarre concoctions involving animal fat, minerals, and even precious stones. The village healer is busy this week. Half the children have the same hacking cough. She's handed out nettle syrup, brewed marigold tea, and distributed tiny charms, bits of string or cloth to tie around wrists and ankles. Don't untie it until the fever breaks, she warns. You obey, because not obeying is unthinkable. The healer may be old, sharp-tongued, and prone to telling frightening tales, but her word carries weight. She claims she can see sickness like shadows clinging to skin. Still, not every remedy is harmless. You remember last spring when a boy down the lane was fed spider soup, an old fable brought to life by a mother desperate to cure a lingering fever. The spider was caught, boiled, mashed into broth, and fed to the child at midnight with prayers to Saint Michael. Did it help? Perhaps. The boy survived, though his mother still shudders at the memory. He grew strong and quick, she says, but he won't eat soup now, not even for a festival. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, it was thought that a live frog placed in a child's mouth would draw out a sore throat or fever. You've never seen it done, but the story lingers, along with others about burning old shoes to break a cough or feeding children mashed earthworms for stomach pain. Every family, it seems, has its secret horror or hidden hope. The healer tells stories to reinforce her cures. She claims she once cured a boy's night terrors by sewing a bat's wing into his tunic. Another time, She buried an egg at midnight under the full moon to banish evil humours. Historians still argue whether these rituals provided real relief or were simply ways for mothers to feel some control in a world run by chaos and luck. The line between science and superstition here is fine as a spider's thread. You're careful to follow the healer's advice, even when it makes no sense. If she tells you to tie a red string around your baby's ankle, you do it. If she says not to cut a child's hair before his first birthday, you obey, no matter how wild it grows. There's comfort in the ritual, in the sense that you're part of a long chain of mothers stretching back to the beginning of memory. Not all fables end happily. Sometimes, the cure is worse than the disease. Last year, 2 children nearly choked on a bread poultice meant to cure sore throats, a lump of crust wrapped in linen and tied around the neck at night. Another time, a desperate mother brewed a tea from deadly nightshade thinking it would ease her son's fever. He grew quiet, then cold. The village still murmurs about it in the evenings, a lesson and a warning. Still, you do what you can. For a cold, you rub goose fat on your child's chest, then wrap her tightly in a warm cloth. For teething pains, you press a clove between her gums and sing her a lullaby. Half comfort, half spell. For nightmares, you hang a sachet of dried lavender and mugwort above the bed. For every ailment there's a story, a cure, a superstition. Wart on a new moon, rub it with a bean. Boil an egg and roll it over a bruise to draw out the pain. Sometimes you think half of mothering is remembering the right story at the right time. You talk to other mothers at the well, trading advice and caution. Agnes is trying onions for her daughter's cough. Marta swears by a compress of mashed apples. The old women scoff at the new priest's advice. Pray harder, insisting that prayer alone won't cure a fever. Still, everyone does it. You pray, you brew, you sing, and sometimes you just wait and hope. One thing everyone agrees on: never ignore a warning sign. If a child stops eating or refuses water or grows listless, you drop everything to tend to them. You've seen too many little ones fade away for want of a quick remedy. Sometimes just being there, holding, rocking, whispering stories, is all you can do. Other times it feels like nothing helps. You remember the time your own mother sat up all night with you, rubbing your chest with garlic and honey, singing until her voice cracked. You survived, and she always said it was the honey, not the garlic, that worked. You think it was her love more than anything. Historians still debate whether these endless cures were genuinely effective, or if most children simply got better, or didn't, regardless. You think about this often, especially in the quiet hours of the night, listening for every breath from your sleeping child. Is it the herbs, the faith, or just fate? Sometimes the remedies come with rituals: bathing a child at dawn, reciting a prayer backwards, feeding the first spoonful to a stray dog to confuse the spirits. You find yourself following these rules without thinking. It's not just habit, it's hope. Every little act feels like one more shield between your child and the dangers of the world. A quirky fact from the healer. To keep the evil spirits away, a child's first tooth must be thrown into the fire with a blessing. You dutifully do this, smiling at the tiny flame as if it really holds your child's future in its flickering tongue. You save the rest of the teeth, though, wrapped in cloth, hidden in a box, just in case. Some days the remedies seem endless. For upset bellies there's mint or fennel, for headaches crushed willow bark. When the fever won't break, you call on the whole village, neighbours bringing herbs, advice, sometimes just company. You learn not to turn away any help, no matter how strange. You wonder sometimes how mothers in the future will look back at your efforts. Will they laugh at your remedies, as you laugh at the old stories about frogs and bats? Or will they understand, as you do, that love is the true medicine, and everything else is just a way of holding on? You spend so much time fighting for your children that you rarely stop to rest. Even on the rare days when everyone is well, your mind runs through the list of dangers. You keep an eye on the weather, the water, the neighbours, and every cough or rash. You sing, you pray, you hope. Sometimes, despite all your efforts, children die. You mourn, you remember, and you tell their stories. so that in some way they're never truly gone. The fatal fables become lessons for your other children, warnings about swimming in the mill pond or eating berries from the wrong bush. Yet there are miracles too, recoveries no one can explain, turnarounds that feel like gifts from the saints. When your child laughs again, eats again, grows rosy and strong, you hold those moments close. You celebrate quietly, not too loudly, in case the spirits are listening. You finish your day tired but grateful. Another battle fought, another child safe for one more night. You kiss your children as they drift to sleep, promising them stories in the morning. Your voice is soft, soothing, full of old tales and hope. As darkness settles, you light a single candle and whisper thanks for the day's small mercies. You set out your healing herbs for tomorrow, arrange your charms and tuck your remedies close. There are no guarantees, but there is always love, and sometimes that is enough. Dawn finds you already awake, mind heavy with worry and body aching from another sleepless night. But you have no time for weariness. The baby is restless, fussing at your breast, and you keep glancing at her face for signs of fever, of paleness, of something you can't name but dread deeply. Today you move with extra haste, wrapping her snugly, preparing to take her on a journey that can't wait. The baptism. This is no ordinary village errand. It is a race against time and fate, a ritual that may mean the difference between hope and haunting. You step out into the cool morning air, the village half shrouded in mist, cottages and crooked fences blurring into ghostly shapes. As you walk, your heart pounds with anxiety and urgency, because in your world, babies die, often and suddenly, and if they die unbaptized, the consequences, you're told, are unthinkable. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, infant mortality rates were so high that the church encouraged baptism as soon as possible, ideally within days, sometimes within hours of birth. For a child to die without baptism was not just a personal tragedy but a spiritual crisis. The soul, people believed, would not reach heaven. It would wander the edges of the afterlife, shut out from God's embrace. That was the church's teaching, and it shaped everything about the way mothers cared for their babies. The path to the church is familiar, but it feels different today, charged with fear and hope. You clutch your child tightly, headscarf pulled low against the damp. The church bell rings in the distance, slow and solemn, as if echoing your heartbeat. Inside, the priest prepares a basin of cold, clear water, muttering prayers in Latin as you enter with your bundle. Your mother meets you there, along with your sister and a neighbour to stand as godparents. The rules are strict. The ceremony must happen quickly, no matter the weather or the hour, and godparents must be present to speak the child's name aloud. Sometimes, in emergencies, the midwife herself does the baptism, pouring water over a baby's head with trembling hands, reciting the holy words, crossing herself and the child and hoping it's enough. Today you have the luxury, if it can be called that, of doing it properly. The priest intones the words, splashes the water, anoints your baby's brow with oil. The child wails, and you feel relief in her cries. If she's strong enough to scream, perhaps she's strong enough to live. The priest finishes with a blessing and a warning. Raise this child in faith and vigilance. The devil never sleeps. You nod, holding your daughter close, heart beating with fierce, exhausted joy. But not every mother is so lucky. In the dead of winter, when roads are impassable and the church is far, babies are baptized at home or, in desperation, by anyone who can say the words. If the baby dies before the priest arrives, the mother's grief is doubled. Not only has she lost her child, but she is left fearing for her soul. Historians still argue how much comfort baptism really brought to mothers, or whether it simply replaced one fear with another. The ritual is over, but the anxiety lingers. The godparents give you small tokens, coins, a scrap of cloth, a sprig of rue. For protection, they say, and you nod gratefully. You tuck the gifts away with your other charms, one more layer of hope and tradition against the terrors of the world. A quirky tidbit. In some villages, after a baptism, mothers would place the child's swaddling clothes under the church altar for a night, believing it would grant extra protection. Others whispered that a child baptized on a saint's day would have luck all her life. Some said it was bad luck to speak the baby's name before the ceremony. You follow every rule you know, and some you make up as you go, because when your child's soul is at stake, you take no chances. The walk home is lighter, but you're still alert. Every neighbour you pass congratulates you, but there's always an undercurrent of caution. God keep her safe. May she grow strong. Let the saints watch over her. No one says what you're all thinking. Will she survive? Will you have to make this journey again for another tiny body, another tiny soul? Your children meet you at the door, eager and chattering. You hug them tightly, drawing strength from their warmth. For a moment the cottage feels safe, blessed. You set about making a meal, thin soup and crusts of bread, a special treat after the ritual. The children chatter about the ceremony, and you let yourself laugh with them. Today at least, you've beaten the odds. But tomorrow is another day, and the dangers return. A fever, a cough, a sudden stillness in the night. You never stop watching, never stop worrying. The godparents visit again, bringing advice and more little gifts, a silver coin, a clove of garlic, a woven charm to hang above the cradle. Each one is meant to protect the baby from the dangers that swirl around every child. You remember the stories your mother told you of the children born at the wrong time of year or during a thunderstorm, who are always more fragile, more at risk. You remember the tale of the changeling, the baby swapped by fairies, and the elaborate rituals to keep such spirits at bay. Baptism, you're told, is the surest shield, but you know many mothers who've baptized babies only to lose them anyway. The world is full of mysteries that the church cannot answer. You take comfort in small things, the baby's strong cry, her appetite, the way she grips your finger. Each is a sign that for today she is healthy. You mark the day in your memory, not on a calendar but in your heart. If she survives to the next holy day, you'll give thanks with an offering at the church. If not, you can only hope she's safe wherever she is. Historians still debate whether mothers truly believed in all the rules, or if the rituals were simply a way to keep hope alive. Did they find comfort in holy water and oil, or were they just desperate for something to do, some way to fight back against fate? You suspect it's both. When your child's life is at stake, faith and fear become impossible to separate. At night, you kneel by the cradle, whispering prayers you barely remember learning, prayers in Latin and the local tongue, prayers that blend with lullabies and wishes. You ask the saints to watch over your child, to spare her from fever and sudden death. You beg for more time, for a chance to watch her grow, to see her walk and talk and play. There are moments when you doubt, when you wonder if the prayers matter, if the rituals have any power at all. You see children die every month, even those baptized within hours of birth, even those whose mothers follow every rule. Sometimes, faith feels like a thread stretched too thin, but it's all you have. You teach your older children the rituals too, how to cross themselves, how to say the right words at the right time. You want them to know the rules to be able to protect themselves when you're not there. You teach them the stories, the fables, the secret tricks that only mothers know. You hope that, if you're ever gone, they'll remember. A quirky tradition. Some mothers bake a baptism loaf, a special bread shared only after the ceremony. A crumb is placed under the child's pillow to sweeten dreams. You make one yourself, sharing it with your family as the baby sleeps. You savour the taste, letting yourself believe in good omens. The days pass, the anxiety's fading but never vanishing. Every time your baby coughs or fusses, your mind jumps to the worst. You listen for every breath, checking for fever, for the signs you fear and know so well. You talk with other mothers, sharing news of who is sick, who is well, who made it through the night. Sometimes you attend another baptism, sometimes for a healthy child, sometimes a desperate ritual for a baby not expected to last the day. The ceremonies blur together in your memory. Water, prayers, oil, the cries of new life. Each one is both a promise and a plea. You wonder sometimes about the meaning of it all. Why so much loss? Why so many rules? So many rituals that sometimes feel empty? But then your child laughs, or smiles, or grabs your hand with surprising strength, and you find your answer. You keep going for her, for all your children, for the hope that one day the rituals will not be needed, that mothers will not have to fear the night. As another night falls, you tuck your baby into her cradle, the marks of the baptism still fresh on her forehead. You whisper one last prayer, light a candle, and watch over her as she sleeps. For tonight at least, you have done all you can. The next day brings a chill that gnaws through your patched-up clothes and stings your cheeks as you step outside. You glance at your little vegetable patch, already battered by an unkind wind, and then up at the sky, a sullen mass of grey. The crows caw louder than usual as if warning of things to come. You pull your shawl tight and hope, quietly, for the best. In your world, a change in weather can tip the scales between life and death. When harvests fail, or the winter stretches long, every mother feels the fear press a little closer. This is the cruel rhythm of medieval life. Weather, famine, and unkind harvests that determine not just what you eat, but who will survive to see spring. You're always calculating, always watching the skies, always planning for hunger. It isn't just you. Every woman in the village wakes with the same worries humming under her breath. You see it in their faces at the market, their cautious way of eyeing the piles of grain, the quiet way they count coins. If you have nothing to trade or your crop fails, you beg, borrow or steal. You do what you must to feed your children. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was constantly at the mercy of unpredictable weather. A single bad year, a summer too wet, a winter too long, could spell disaster for entire communities. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 killed millions. Historians still argue about how often smaller famines swept through, but every village remembers its own hungry years. It's not just about food. Famine brings disease, weakens the old and the very young, and makes every mother's task harder. You keep an anxious watch on your food stores. Barley, oats, a handful of dried beans, and the last of the salted fish. The bread grows stale. The root cellar is emptier than you'd like. You ration the cheese, stretching it over many meals, slicing it thinner and thinner. Hunger gnaws at you, but you save the best for the children. You always do. The baby is fussy again, and you know it's hunger more than illness. Her belly is rounded, but her limbs are thin. What the old women call hunger swelling. You mash a turnip and mix it with a little milk, hoping she'll eat enough to sleep. The older children eat their porridge quietly, scraping their bowls for every last grain. They're used to going hungry, used to seeing you skip meals so they can have more. When the weather turns truly bad, when frost comes early or rain ruins the grain, you feel the panic in your bones. Everyone does. You and your neighbours gather at the well and talk in low voices about the crop. The wheat's rotting on the stalk, someone says. The barley's thin as grass. The men grumble about taxes. The women trade advice about stretching flour or making broth from bones. Sometimes you share what little you have. Other times hunger sharpens tempers and closes doors. A quirky tidbit. In desperate times, mothers sometimes boiled grass, nettles, or even tree bark to feed their children. You've done it yourself, plucking nettles in spring and carefully boiling them for soup. The sting is gone after cooking, but you still remember the itch on your hands. You remember the old rhyme, "Nettles in May keep hunger away." Whether it's true or not, you cling to the hope that anything green is better than nothing. You watch the sky for omens, a ring around the moon, the way birds gather, the colour of the sunset. Every sign matters. You say a quick prayer to Saint Isidore, the patron of farmers, and hope your words will be heard. You think of the hunger stone at the edge of the stream, half buried most years, but fully exposed now. "If you see me, weep," it reads, and you shiver. Famine does more than shrink bellies. It brings sickness too. Weakened by hunger, children catch fevers more easily, wounds fester, and coughs linger. You do your best. Boiling water for tea, making syrup from wild berries, brewing potions from what little the woods offer. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it's not enough. Historians still debate which killed more children in hard years, starvation or the diseases that came with it. You know it's both. Your mind turns to the church. On Sunday, the priest prays for rain or sun depending on what's needed. He preaches about faith and patience, but you hear the same worry in his voice. Everyone brings a little extra to the altar, a loaf, an egg, a promise to fast in hope that God will relent. You try to believe, but some days it's hard. You wonder if your prayers are lost in the wind. Your children notice the changes too. They get quieter, more watchful. The games they play in the yard change. Sometimes they pretend to be rich merchants. Sometimes they make a feast of pebbles and leaves, laughing at their own hunger. You tell them stories to keep their spirits up. Old tales about clever peasants who tricked famine, saints who made bread appear, or animals who shared food with starving children. In the evenings, you do what you can to keep everyone warm and close. The family crowds together by the fire, wrapped in blankets, telling stories or singing old songs. The oldest children remember the last bad year and keep their worries to themselves. The little ones cry more easily. You soothe them as best you can, humming lullabies and promising that spring will come soon. Sometimes there's a knock at the door, a neighbour with a crust of bread to share or a plea for help. You always give what you can, knowing that one day you might need to ask for the same. The rules of charity are simple. Help when you can, forgive when you must, remember every kindness. It's how you survive. But famine tests even the strongest bonds. Arguments break out over small things, a missing carrot, an extra egg, a rumour that someone is hoarding flour. Old grudges surface. You remember the story of a village that nearly tore itself apart one winter when food ran low. Only the women held things together, sharing what they could, calming the men, watching over the children. Historians still argue whether women's networks were the true backbone of survival in hard times. A quirky fact: in some places villagers made soul cakes, simple breads left on doorsteps for wandering spirits, especially around All Souls' Day. Sometimes these cakes found their way to hungry children before the spirits could claim them. You've left cakes out yourself, half for tradition, half in hope that the neighbours' children will find them and eat. The hardest nights come when there's nothing left to give. You lie awake, listening to your children's stomachs grumble, feeling your own hunger sharp as a knife. You pray for dawn, for a change in the weather, for a miracle. Sometimes, a passing merchant brings news of food in the next village, or a travelling friar offers dried beans in exchange for a prayer. Sometimes, you go to bed hungry and wake up hungrier. But there are better years too. Years when the harvest is good, when the root cellar is full, when you can dry apples and store cabbages, when every child grows rounder, and the air in the cottage is thick with the smell of baking bread. In those times, you remember the bad years as a warning, but also as proof that you can survive. You teach your children what you know, how to gather wild herbs, how to dry berries, how to make soup from almost nothing. You teach them gratitude for every meal and kindness to those with less. You tell them to remember the hungry years, but not to lose hope in the lean ones. Mainstream fact: medieval peasants developed 1,000 ways to make food last. Salting, drying, fermenting, pickling. You use all these tricks, storing onions in the rafters, pickling cabbage in big clay pots, salting fish when you can afford it. Nothing is wasted. Every crumb, every drop of milk, every handful of beans is precious. Some years the weather breaks your heart. Floods sweep away the spring planting, hail flattens the rye, or blight turns the potatoes to rot. When that happens, you gather your courage, gather your family, and do what mothers have always done. You make do, you make up stories, you make a way. Historians still argue about the psychological toll of famine. Did it make people harder, more ruthless, or did it bind them together in empathy and shared suffering? You see both. Hunger sharpens anger, but also deepens love, making every laugh, every hug, every scrap of bread more meaningful. You end your day exhausted, as always. You kiss your children and tuck them in, promising that you'll keep them safe, that you'll find a way to feed them. You whisper the old prayers and the new ones, hoping that one will reach the right ears. And as you drift off to sleep, you dream of sunshine, full fields, and laughter echoing in a house where hunger is only a memory. You wake to a silence so deep it feels unnatural, like the village is holding its breath. Outside, the sky's an unfriendly yellow-grey, the light bruised and wrong. Your eldest coughs, a hollow rasping sound, and you freeze. The baby whimpers in her sleep and you put your hand to her forehead, searching for heat. You know this dread. Everyone in your world does. Rumour moved faster than fire when the first household fell ill, and now you hear it everywhere. The sickness is here. The Black Death has come for the children. Mainstream historical fact. The Black Death, the bubonic plague, swept through Europe in the mid-14th century and returned in waves for generations. In some places it killed more than half the population, and while stories are often told of adults struck down, historians have found that the plague, like all diseases, showed no mercy to the very young. Babies and children died as quickly as their parents, sometimes faster. You move through the cottage, cleaning obsessively, burning extra herbs in the fire just in case. The air is thick with sage and wormwood, a defence your mother swore by. Some say it keeps the sickness away, others claim the scent attracts bad spirits. You do it anyway. You hang cloth over the windows and keep the door shut, but the fear seeps in with every cough and every silence. The village is quieter than usual. No one lingers at the well. Doors stay shut. The baker's window, always open for gossip, is barred tight. When you do see a neighbour, you nod quickly and move on. No one wants to talk about who is sick and who is not, but everyone knows. You saw Anna's husband carried to the churchyard 2 nights ago, wrapped in sheets, no bell ringing for him. A quirky tidbit. Some mothers dress their children in little red caps or tie bells to their clothes, believing the colour and sound will scare the plague away. Others hang garlands of wildflowers over their beds. You try all these things even as you know they cannot save you if the sickness comes. Inside, the children are restless. You hush them, scold them for peeking out the window, forbid them to go near the neighbour's fence. Don't let anyone in, you warn. The plague does not care for locks, but you must try everything. Historians still argue about the value of quarantines in these times. Some towns escaped, most did not. But every mother clung to whatever scraps of control she could muster. When the fever comes, it comes hard and fast. You notice it in your middle child first. Flushed cheeks, dry lips, wild eyes. She cries for water, then pushes the cup away delirious. You call for help, but no one comes. Everyone is afraid. In a world where even the priest is afraid to give last rites, you become both healer and mourner. You bring every remedy you know, cloth soaked in vinegar, rose water to dab her lips, onion broth, endless whispered prayers. You burn more herbs, sweep the floor with salt, recite the psalms your mother taught you. Nothing helps. The fever climbs higher. The child shivers and sweats, and then, suddenly, grows quiet. You hold her through the worst of it, counting her breaths, watching her hands for the telltale black spots everyone whispers about. You rock her, singing lullabies from when she was a baby, your voice raw. She drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for you, sometimes for her grandmother, sometimes just mumbling nonsense. You press her against your chest, promising you won't let go. Historians debate whether the plague hit children harder than adults, but you don't need records to tell you. It takes whoever it wants. Sometimes it skips a house. Sometimes it leaves a whole family untouched while wiping out the neighbours. You remember the story of the old widow at the edge of town who lost all 5 children in a week, but survived herself. No one speaks to her much anymore. You see the signs everywhere. The black swellings under arms and groin, the sudden violent coughs, the bodies wrapped in sheets at night, carted away before sunrise. The gravedigger works until he collapses, and there's always another grave. You keep your children close, terrified of a single sneeze, a single cough. You wash their hands with vinegar, though the smell makes them cry. You throw out straw bedding, scrub floors until your knuckles bleed. A quirky fact: it's said that a charm made from the bones of a blackbird buried at the crossroads will confuse death. Desperate mothers have tried it. You bury a handful of feathers in the yard just in case. Days pass in a fevered blur. The children grow quiet, the house seems to shrink. You leave food at the door for neighbours, bread, herbs, anything, without speaking. Sometimes someone leaves something for you. But mostly there is just silence. The church bell rings only for mass burials now, the priest's voice hoarse from prayers. You pray yourself hoarse too. Sometimes you are angry, at God, at fate, at the unfairness of it all. Other times you are numb. You wonder if you could ever feel anything again if you lost another child, but you keep fighting. You refuse to stop fighting because giving in means letting the darkness win. Then miraculously the fever breaks. Your child opens her eyes, asks for water, and eats a little bread. You weep with relief, kissing her face over and over. You give thanks, silently, loudly, in every way you know. You offer a candle at the church, though you stand in the back and leave before the prayers are over. You don't want to tempt fate. But not every child survives. You hear the wails of mourning from across the fields, the grief that never seems to end. Every family is touched. Every mother learns to grieve quickly, to carry on with her work even as her heart breaks. The children who recover are thin, weak, haunted by nightmares. You feed them whatever you can, sweet broth, apples if you have them, honey when it's available. The world seems changed, quieter and sharper. The fields are half-tended, the animals neglected, the market empty except for a few desperate souls. You help dig graves, because there's no one left who hasn't lost someone. Sometimes the children help too, carrying little baskets of earth or flowers. You try to explain death to your youngest, who is too little to remember the last time the plague came. She's gone to be with the angels, you say, or God needed her more than we did. You don't know if it helps, but you hope it does. You tell stories about how brave the children were, how proud you are, how much you love them. You let them sleep in your bed, needing their warmth as much as they need yours. You mark the passing of the plague with small rituals, a meal shared with neighbours who survived, prayers for the lost, candles for the departed. Historians still argue whether the plague made people more religious or more fatalistic. You know it does both. You pray harder and doubt more, sometimes in the same breath. You rebuild, slowly. You plant the garden again, mend clothes, repair the thatch. You gather with other mothers, sharing your losses in a language of looks and silences. The laughter comes back, though it is quieter and tinged with sorrow. The children play again, though they keep close to home. You remember each child lost to the plague, their smiles, their mischief, their favourite songs. You tell the stories again and again so they are not forgotten. You plant a rosebush for each one, a living memory in the yard. A quirky tradition. Some mothers hang little bells on the doors and windows after a plague year, believing the sound will keep death away. You tie one over the cradle, listening to its soft chime as you fall asleep. As the world slowly recovers, you feel changed. Older, sadder, but also fiercer. You have survived the plague, and so have your children. For now at least, you are safe. For now, you can breathe. For now, you dare to hope again. You end the day with gratitude and sorrow in equal measure, holding your children close and promising silently to keep them safe from whatever comes next. You wake before dawn to a hush that feels heavy, almost sacred. For a moment, you let yourself believe that the worst is over. The fever has broken, the air outside is no longer thick with death, and your surviving children sleep deeply. But as you move through the dim morning, lighting the fire and listening to the soft snuffles and sighs from the bed, you realise that grief is a companion you can't shake. In the medieval world, loss is woven into daily life, an invisible thread in the fabric of every mother's existence. You look at your children, your heart tight with love and fear. It's impossible to explain to them, to yourself, how many times your heart has broken and mended, how often you have mourned and still found the strength to keep going. Grief here is not a private matter, not something you can hide away. It shapes your every movement, it colours the lullabies you sing and the stories you tell. The memory of those you've lost echoes in every gesture. Mainstream historical fact: medieval mothers buried more children than they raised. In some communities, half of all children died before the age of 5. Graveyards were filled with small markers, often unmarked, sometimes clustered together in a corner set aside for babies and young children. Some families planted flowers on the graves, others marked them with nothing but a stone or a memory. You wrap your shawl tightly around your shoulders, feeling the chill seep through the walls, and begin your daily routine. The world keeps turning no matter how heavy your heart. You knead bread, gather water, sweep the dirt floor. Your arms remember the babies you carried who are no longer here. Your hands, rough and cracked from work, ache for the ones you can't hold anymore. Grief is a shared language in your village. When you meet another mother at the well, you don't need to speak of loss. You can see it in her eyes, hear it in the careful way she asks about your children. Sometimes you exchange a touch on the arm, a shared look that says, "I understand." There is comfort in that, but also a loneliness. Everyone grieves, but no two losses are the same. A quirky tidbit. In some villages, mothers would weave tiny dolls from leftover yarn or scraps of cloth to remember the children they lost. These mourning dolls were kept in a drawer or tucked into a pocket, a secret token of love and sorrow. You have one hidden in your own chest, its hair the colour of your lost child's. You remember each child in different ways. For one, you sing a song you made up when she was little, her name hidden in the words. For another, you keep a ribbon she once wore. For the baby who died in winter, you plant snowdrops every year in the corner of the yard. These are small things, but they help. They make the loss a little less sharp, the memory a little more tangible. Historians still argue about how deeply medieval women felt these losses. Some say mothers grew numb, others insist the pain was as raw and real as it is today. You know the truth. Every loss leaves a mark. You never forget. You just learn to live with the ache. You try not to let your children see you cry, though sometimes you can't help it. At night, when everyone else is asleep, you let the tears come. You remember the first time you buried a child, how your legs gave out and the world tilted. The village women helped you to your feet, wrapped you in blankets, brought you broth and bread. You have to keep going, they said, and you did, even when you thought you couldn't. Daily life is filled with reminders, the empty places at the table, the small shoes tucked away, the lullabies that catch in your throat. Every time a child laughs, you feel a surge of joy and a pang of sorrow for the ones who aren't there to join in. You watch your children play and wonder who they would be if their brothers and sisters had survived. Quirky fact: in some households, mothers kept a grief book, a piece of parchment or even a bit of old cloth where they marked the dates of births and deaths. Some wrote poems or prayers, some just tallied the numbers. It was a way to remember, a way to give form to the formless ache. You teach your children about the siblings they never knew. You tell them stories, show them the little tokens you've saved. You had a brother who loved birds, you say, or your sister had the sweetest laugh. It's important, you think, for them to know they are part of something larger, a family bound together not just by blood, but by memory. The church plays its role in mourning too. You light candles for the lost, say prayers for their souls. On All Souls' Day, you join the procession to the graveyard, carrying flowers and singing hymns. The priest reminds everyone that the dead are always with you, watching over, waiting to be reunited. You're not sure you believe it, but you find comfort in the ritual. Sometimes you find yourself caught between grief and gratitude. You mourn the children you lost, but you cherish the ones who remain all the more fiercely. Their laughter is a balm, their small victories, learning to walk, to speak, to read, are reasons to celebrate. You learn to find joy in tiny moments, to gather happiness wherever you can. Your grief changes with time. It becomes less sharp, more a part of you. Some days it feels like a soft ache. Other days it rushes back with full force, a birthday mist, a favourite song on the wind, the smell of bread baking in the oven. You let yourself feel it all, because not feeling would be worse. Historians still argue whether women found solace in each other, or if grief isolated them. You think it's both. You share stories with other mothers, cry together, sometimes laugh at memories so sweet they almost hurt. But in the end, your grief is yours alone. No one else knows exactly what you've lost. You try to honour your children in small ways. You make their favourite foods on feast days, plant flowers for them in the spring, whisper their names when you wake at night. These rituals are as much for you as for them, a way to keep them close, to remind yourself that love endures even when life does not. The world moves on, always. The fields need planting, the animals need tending, the bread must rise. You go about your work, singing to yourself, letting the memories come and go like the tide. You love your children fiercely, knowing how fragile they are, how quickly they can be lost. At the end of the day, you gather your children close and tell them you love them. You let them see your tears sometimes and teach them that grief is nothing to be ashamed of. You tell them it's okay to miss the ones who are gone, that remembering is another way of loving. You light a candle for your lost children and set it in the window. The light flickers in the darkness, a small beacon of hope and remembrance. You watch it for a while, letting yourself feel the ache and the gratitude, the sorrow and the joy. As you fall asleep, you whisper their names, promising you'll never forget. You know tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows, but tonight you let yourself grieve, and in that grief you find a kind of peace. You open your eyes before dawn's first glow, your sleep broken by the familiar cry of the baby and the distant sound of the cockerel. For a moment you lie still, listening to the breathing around you, your older children huddled together for warmth, the baby restless at your side and the quiet gaps where there should have been more. Your life, like every medieval mother's, is measured in absences and presences, the soft hush of memory beside the loud demand of the present. Still, you rise because there is always work, and in the rhythm of chores you find a thread of comfort. You begin with water. Every day you walk to the well, buckets swinging from numb fingers, eyes scanning the sky for signs of weather, for omens. The village is stirring, dogs bark, a door slams, someone curses at a stubborn goat. You greet Agnes with a nod, both of you careful not to talk too loudly. It's a day for remembering after all, a feast day for the patron saint of lost children. In a world without calendars, you keep time by ritual, by the pattern of prayers and processions and commemorations that anchor your grief. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was marked by an abundance of saints' days, feast days, and local commemorations. Some were official, others were informal traditions, created by mothers and families to honour the memory of lost children. Tiny shrines in churchyards, processions with candles, prayers said over graves or at family altars. Historians debate whether these customs grew from Christian roots or from older pagan rituals. But for mothers, they offered solace and a way to make grief visible, shareable. Today, you and the other women gather at the church. Some carry flowers, others small tokens, a child's wooden toy, a handful of wild strawberries, a piece of ribbon. The priest welcomes you with sombre eyes. He knows why you've come. You line up along the stone wall, your children shuffling beside you, and kneel in the dew-heavy grass. The ceremony is simple, a prayer for the departed, a candle lit for each name whispered. You mouth the names of your own, feeling them settle on your tongue like a blessing and a wound. The priest offers comfort, quoting scripture, reminding you that the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. You find the words only partly reassuring. You've heard them at every funeral, every graveside, every moment of loss. Sometimes they comfort, sometimes they sting. What you crave most is not words, but recognition. A world that sees your sorrow and allows you to name it out loud. A quirky tidbit. In your village, it's customary to leave a piece of sweet cake at the church door after the ceremony, a gift for the lost children who are said to wander close on this day. Children compete to snatch up the offerings after the prayers are done. You let your children take their share, watching them laugh and race in the churchyard sunlight. For a few moments, the village feels lighter. When the prayers end, you linger with the other mothers, sharing stories in quiet voices. Some talk of dreams, waking in the night to feel a small hand in theirs, or hearing a beloved laugh echo down the lane. Some remember the strange signs that came before a child's death. A bird tapping at the window, a sudden unexplained rainbow, a sense of foreboding that lingered in the air. Historians still argue whether such beliefs are superstitions or a kind of folk wisdom, a way of making sense of loss in a world without explanations. You go home and set an extra plate at the table, a custom in your family since before you can remember. At mealtime, you place a bit of bread, a sip of milk for the children who are gone. Your living children accept the ritual without question. They've grown up with it, as you did. You say their names again, softly as you eat. You are not sure what you believe, only that you feel closer to your lost ones when you share these small gestures. Life continues, always. After breakfast, you mend clothes, sweep the hearth, gather herbs in the garden. You show your youngest how to twist a daisy chain. Tell her a story about her oldest brother, the one she never met, whose laughter you try to keep alive in memory and tales. Your children ask questions, sometimes awkward, sometimes piercing. Why did God take them? Will we see them again? You do your best to answer, knowing there are no words that truly satisfy. A quirky fact. Some mothers keep small jars of tears collected during periods of mourning, sealed and buried in the garden at midsummer. You have never tried this, but Agnes swears it helps her roses bloom brighter. Whether it is magic, faith, or just an excuse for care, you can't say, but you like the idea that grief can be transformed into beauty. The day stretches on. You take your children to the fields to gather wildflowers for the graves. You show them how to press petals between the pages of a book, how to weave garlands to hang on the fence posts. These tasks are gentle, soothing, a way to make memory tangible, to anchor love in the world of the living. Mainstream fact. Medieval families often developed elaborate rituals for memorializing lost children. Annual visits to graves, special prayers said at home, objects kept as relics or talismans. Some households passed down lockets or bracelets. Some lit a candle every night for a year after a child's death. Historians have found letters and diaries describing these rituals, sometimes in heartbreaking detail. You sometimes worry about the weight your children carry, about the way loss shapes them before they have words for it. You wonder if they will grow up fearful, or if they will learn resilience, the quiet courage you hope to model. You see how they comfort one another, how they share what little they have, how they grow fierce in protecting their own. You end the day as you always do, gathered by the fire, telling stories and singing. Tonight you choose songs that remind you of your lost children, melodies that linger in the corners of your heart. Your voice wavers, but your children sing with you, weaving their laughter and sorrow together. Historians still argue about whether these rituals, these little acts of remembrance, heal or simply remind. You know the truth is both. The pain never leaves, but neither does the love. To remember is to honour, to keep alive what would otherwise be lost. As the fire burns low, you light a final candle and set it on the windowsill. You watch its glow flicker against the dark, and for a moment, you imagine it is a signal to the children you've lost. You are remembered, you're missed, you're loved. You whisper their names once more, letting the silence settle around you. Before sleep, you tuck your children in, pressing a kiss to each forehead, lingering on the oldest and the youngest, and the memory of those in between. You promise yourself you will keep their stories alive, will not let them fade into the silence of forgotten names. In this way, you find your own kind of peace, a quiet acceptance woven through with hope. Tomorrow will come, with all its demands and duties, joys and worries, but tonight, in the company of memory and ritual, you let yourself grieve and love in equal measure. The next morning dawns pale and cold, a thin wash of sunlight straining through the low clouds. You wake to the sounds of the village, the soft braying of a donkey, a rooster's call, children's sleepy voices, and the faint toll of the church bell. Today is a market day, and though it brings the prospect of barter and much-needed supplies, it also brings reminders. You will see mothers with empty arms, faces etched with loss, glances exchanged between women who know the weight of grief. You help your children dress, brushing tangles from hair and tying up cloaks with worn ribbon. You hold the baby, your only infant now, with care that is fierce and tender, the sort of touch born from loss as much as love. Her breath is warm against your neck, her small hand tangled in your tunic, and you wonder if you hold her tighter than you did her brothers and sisters before her. You do not say their names out loud, but you think them with every step. The walk to the market is muddy. You cross rutted lanes and duck beneath the bare branches of ancient trees. The air smells of earth and wood smoke. There's a line of villagers on the road ahead, baskets empty or full, carrying eggs, cheese, apples, whatever little they have to trade. Your children chatter, voices nervous and excited, clutching hands as the village square appears. Mainstream historical fact. For many medieval families, the village market was both a lifeline and a gathering point. It was where you found food and news, medicines and remedies, and where mothers exchanged the latest stories, sometimes in the hope of finding comfort or a solution, sometimes simply to be understood. You reach the square, its cobbles slick with the drizzle of last night's rain. The stalls are simple, boards propped on barrels, baskets brimming with winter greens, turnips, salted fish. The baker's stand is set up at the far side, and the smell of fresh bread draws a line of tired, hopeful people. You barter quietly, giving what you can, a spool of thread, a dozen eggs, a bit of dried sage from your garden. Every mother is doing the same math. How many meals can be made from what's here? How to stretch a penny farther? You see Agnes and Marta, their children gathered around them. You notice the gaps, the space where a little one should be, the silence that says more than words. You share a quick touch, a murmured blessing, eyes shining with understanding. Some things are too deep for speech. A quirky tidbit. At the market, it's common for mothers to tie coloured ribbons to their children's sleeves, a way to keep them close and mark them as watched against wandering spirits or ill-meaning eyes. Your mother's mother taught you to knot a red thread at the wrist, whispering a rhyme under your breath. You do it now for your baby, the gesture part ritual, part superstition, and part simple habit. The market is a cacophony of voices, bargaining, gossiping, laughing, sometimes weeping. You hear the news from the next village over. A fire destroyed 2 cottages. A new baby was born to the miller's wife. The old healer has died. The healer's death stirs a ripple of anxiety. Who will know the right herbs now, the best remedies for fever, the old magic? Someone mutters a prayer for the dead, another offers to share recipes. Mothers gather, comparing notes, how best to soothe a cough, how to treat a rash, what to do when milk runs dry. Historians still argue how much of this market wisdom was true medicine, and how much was hope dressed up in tradition. You know it's both. Sometimes you buy a little rosemary, not because you need it, but because it reminds you of home, of your own mother's hands. Sometimes you buy a charm, a bead, a bit of carved bone, just for peace of mind. You find yourself talking with Agnes, both of you keeping half an eye on the children and half on the business of the square. She mentions her daughter's lingering cough. You suggest a syrup of onions and honey, the way your mother made. She nods, grateful for advice, and for the simple reassurance that someone else is paying attention. This is how mothers help each other, with shared wisdom, shared sorrow, shared hope. There's laughter too, as children chase each other around the stalls, giggling and shrieking. It's a relief to see them play, to hear their voices rise above the solemn conversations of adults. You watch your youngest take a tottering step after her older sister, her cheeks rosy, her eyes bright with mischief. For a moment, you let yourself believe that life is more than loss, that joy still lives in the cracks. A quirky fact. Some mothers bring bread shaped into tiny animals or figures to the market, meant for children to eat for luck. You buy a small bird-shaped roll for your youngest and watch her break it in two, sharing half with her sister, crumbs scattering on the damp stone. Superstition or not, the moment feels like a blessing. The day unfolds in small moments. A neighbour's story about her brother's recovery from fever, the exchange of a bundle of firewood for a basket of eggs, a shared song hummed while waiting in line. At the market's edge, a group of women offer a prayer for the lost children of the village. You bow your head, whispering the names you carry always in your heart. Historians note that even in times of deepest grief, medieval mothers sought connection, through markets, through song, through shared ritual. You see it today in every hand squeezed, every bit of advice offered, every blessing given. Grief may isolate, but it also binds, weaving a tapestry of community and resilience. As the market winds down, you gather your children and purchases, tying up cloaks and collecting stray shoes. You accept a handful of dried apples from Marta for the road home, and promise to share a recipe for nettle soup in return. The village square empties, voices trailing away, and you feel the exhaustion settle in your bones. The walk home is quieter. Your children eat the apples and talk softly, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of your steps. You think of all the mothers who have walked this road before you, all the children who have laughed and cried here, all the memories that linger in the ruts and hedges. At home, you put away your purchases, stoke the fire, and begin preparing supper. The day's fatigue is deep, but so is the sense of accomplishment. A market day survived, another day with your family around you. The children help set the table, and you pause to look at each of them, grateful for their presence, mourning the absences, honouring the tangled knot of love and loss. You end the evening as always, tucking children in, smoothing hair, singing lullabies. You light a candle for the lost, letting its flame flicker in the draughty dark. You tell yourself that each day you endure, each meal you share, each story you tell is a testament. You remember, you persist, you love. Historians still argue whether medieval mothers lived in hope or despair, whether they clung to faith or surrendered to fatalism. You know the answer is never simple. Hope and grief walk hand in hand, just as you and your children do on the muddy road home. You sit by the fire, letting the day's sounds fade, letting memory and gratitude settle around you like a warm shawl. In the quiet, you whisper names, promises, prayers for all the children, here and gone, whose lives have shaped your own. You know that tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows, but tonight your family is together, and for that you give thanks, quietly, fiercely, completely. You rise to the sounds of village life, softer this morning, as if even the birds and dogs feel the weight of memory. The air is fresh but chilly. You pull your shawl tight, pausing at the threshold of your cottage. Today you have no big errands, no market to rush for, no urgent visit to the healer or the church. Today you are left with the quiet work of living, the steady rhythm that forms the backdrop for every joy and every sorrow in your world. You move through your morning in a kind of gentle haze. The children sleep a little longer, worn out from yesterday's long market walk and the swirl of stories and remembrance. You sit by the fire, hands busy with mending, mind wandering over memories. The silence of the house is comforting and sharp at the same time. Your heart, always aware of who is missing, is also grateful for the warmth of those present. Breakfast is simple: bread and thin broth, a few dried apples left over from market. The children gather around the table, sleep-mussed and hungry. You watch them, drinking in the sight of their faces, the small quarrels and laughter. Even the ordinary moments feel precious. Perhaps this is what you have learned most from loss: to cherish the everyday, to gather small joys close, and to forgive yourself for the times when grief outweighs gratitude. Mainstream historical fact: despite the hardship, medieval families clung to rituals that offered comfort, a blessing before a meal, a prayer at bedtime, the keeping of little relics, the telling of old stories. These daily acts were not just tradition, they were survival, a way to anchor meaning in a world that so often defied understanding. You take up your chores, guiding the children through their own. You sweep the floor, patch holes in tunics, collect eggs from the chickens, and stir the simmering pot over the fire. Work passes the time, eases the mind, and creates order where chaos once reigned. The older children help without being asked, learning from your example, growing stronger in both body and spirit. After chores, you gather the children for lessons. There's no schoolhouse here, but you teach them what you know, how to mend a sock, how to recite the Lord's Prayer, how to measure flour by handfuls, how to tell the weather by the sky. Sometimes you add a song, a poem, a riddle, anything to make learning feel like play. These quiet hours become your favourite part of the day, a space where love and knowledge intertwine. A quirky tidbit. In your village, it is common to tell riddles while you work. What has a heart that doesn't beat, you ask, handing your son a cabbage. He grins and thinks hard. A cabbage. The answer brings laughter. These small rituals strengthen your bond, distract from worry, and build resilience. You remember the riddles your own mother told you, and you know your children will pass them on one day. Later, you send the children outside to play. Their shouts and laughter drift back through the open window, mingling with the birdsong and the clink of your knitting needles. You watch them sometimes, hearts swelling with hope and fear. Every bruise or scraped knee brings a jolt of worry, but also a strange reassurance. Life goes on. You sit in the sun, darning a sock, and let your mind wander. You think of the children you have lost, of the mothers before you, of the endless chain of love and loss that stretches through the centuries. You think of how, for all the pain, you would choose this life again, 100 times over, because the moments of joy shine so fiercely in memory. The day drifts on. You bake bread, the cottage filling with warmth and scent. You help your daughter collect wildflowers, teaching her which to keep and which to leave. You pause to tell a story, one of the old tales filled with magic and courage, where the hero always returns home. As evening falls, you gather the children around the fire. You share supper, and then, as always, you tell stories, sometimes of the saints, sometimes of lost loved ones, sometimes just silly tales to make everyone laugh. The children listen, eyes wide, faces bright in the firelight. Their laughter is a balm. Historians still argue about what truly sustained medieval mothers through so much hardship. Was it faith, hope, habit, or something deeper? An instinct to love, to nurture, to keep going? You know the answer is all of these, braided together like the threads in your shawl. The pain of loss never leaves, but neither does the light of love. As the hour grows late, you tuck your children into their beds, singing softly, smoothing hair from sweaty foreheads. You pause a little longer at the empty spaces, the ones that echo in your dreams. You whisper goodnight to all your children, here and gone, because they are all part of your heart. You sit by the fire one last time, watching the embers fade, feeling the weight of exhaustion and gratitude in your bones. You let the silence settle, undisturbed by fear or regret. You have done your best, you remind yourself, and that is all any mother can do. As the night deepens and the world outside grows soft and distant, you let the rhythm of the day slow with every breath. The fire is low, the air cool but gentle, the shadows long and comforting. You listen to the even breaths of your sleeping children, the night sounds drifting through the cracks in the shutters, a faint owl, the sigh of wind, the heartbeat of the earth itself. You close your eyes, letting go of the weight you have carried all day. The pain of loss is softer now, woven through with the gentle thread of memory. The laughter of your children, those beside you and those you hold only in your heart, lingers in the quiet air, a comfort that glows even as the embers fade. The world will turn again tomorrow, bringing new worries and small joys, and you will meet them both with the strength that has carried you this far. You will wake and work and love, because that is what you know and what you have always done. The pain of the past will never leave you, but neither will the love that outlives it. You drift towards sleep, the edges of the day blurring and softening. The stories of your life settle around you like a quilt, heavy with sorrow, but also warm with love. You are a medieval mother, and your story is one of courage, resilience, and quiet hope. Let the world fall away. Let rest find you. Let the memory of love cradle you through the night. Sweet dreams.